is here to support you with flexible online classes and career-focused resources, so you can earn your degree while balancing work, family, and everything in between. Visit nu.edu to learn more. That's nu.edu.
Here we go. A Thursday edition of the Sports Bash starts now. I'm Mike Gill. What's up, everybody? Josh Henning producing today's show. You out there, Beautiful day down the Jersey Shore, getting ready for the weekend. Not quite yet, not quite weekend, but the weather makes me feel weekendish, right? So, Phillies in action today. A little spring training news and notes on the Phils. I'll get to that in just a second. I got some Eagles thoughts on my mind as the combine is underway. Something Adam Schefter said stands out to me. You'll hear that coming up. Football at 4 today. Jeff Mosher is in the Football at 4 hot seat today. And the Flyers getting ready to take on the Pittsburgh Penguins in the Steel City. Can they sweep the Pens and what that might mean? We'll get into that a little bit later on as the trade deadline in the NHL less than 10 days away here on the Sports Bash. Sixers last night, I got to be honest, I didn't watch a whole heck of a lot of it. They were down 16. I bailed. They got back. They fought hard. Handshake. Kudos to the Sixers for not giving up last night. They stuck around. They hung in that game. They cut it to 1. Paul George gives up the podcast and maybe has his best game as a Sixer. What could have been a Paul George, Tyrese Maxey game in which one scores, I think, 30. I think the other one for 27. And he had a big Kelly Oubre night. Kind of how they all mapped it out, right? Maxey, big night. George, big night. Oubre is kind of like, hey, not every night I'm going to give you 20 plus, but when you need me, I'm there. But this is where not having, Joel Embiid and the rest of the guys to fill their roles. They got nothing from the rest of the characters last night. It was a 3-man show, and they just didn't have enough for the Knicks, and they lose in New York last night. My old buddy, my old co-host Todd Rank was at the game last night. He was sending me pictures from the game. A lot of who's who there watching the game last night as the Sixers lose. But, back in the day when Todd and I used to do the show together, this was right around when the Sixers, it was not right around, it was when the Sixers had Andrew Bynum. That was the season where he and I did the show together, or one of the seasons. We had a couple before that, and then I think his last year on the air with me was the year the Sixers traded for Andrew Bynum, and basically Bynum never played. So all year long, we were going back and forth about when Bynum would play and what it would mean. That team hovered around 500. They were around 500 all season long, but never got Bynum. And we kept wondering, what would that team have been if they got Andrew Bynum? Well, we never found out. Bynum ended up playing one season, or never playing the one season he was in Philadelphia. He left, and because of that, many people believe that the process was born. A lot of people believe that after that season, when Andrew Bynum left, now the next year they make the playoff. They're the 8th seed. They knock off the Bulls in the first round of the playoffs, and they almost beat the Celtics in the second round of the playoffs. If you remember, they lost in a Game 7, and that was a team that was really good. It was like Garnett and Ray Allen and one of the great Celtic teams that they had. And they beat you, and, the Sixers then decide, actually, I flipped that. That was the team that made the playoffs, lost, and then they went and got Bynum. So the thought was, hey, they had this team that was the 8th seed, but they really, they beat the Bulls, but the Bulls lost Derrick Rose, and then I think Noah got hurt in that series. So they felt that team had hit their ceiling. So what do? They trade Andre Iguodala. They go get Bynum. Bynum never plays, and then the process is born. Many people believe the Bynum trade was the catalyst for the Sixers' quote-unquote process. They hire Sam Hinkie. He becomes the general manager of the team, and then they strip the entire franchise down. Well, here we are literally 12 years later. I mean, Hinkie, I think, was hired in 2013 in the offseason. I think that was the first draft that he was a part of. And so many people ask, I was talking to a buddy of mine earlier today, Todd, who hated the process. He'll always say, the process failed. this thing was a joke. And I say, I don't think the debate should be whether the process was a success or not. Everybody has their own thoughts on that. Some people hated it to begin with, so of course it was a failure for you. Other people were supportive of it. I don't look at it as a failure. I look at it as they never won a championship because of it, but I don't look at the time, the era, as a failure. The post, years when they started to win 52 games, number one seed, multiple playoff runs. They just didn't on the court get what we wanted, but there was never a guarantee. That's what people lost sight of. Like, there was no guarantee they were going to win championships. This was, hey, we're going to strip down, try to get the best talent we can get, and the hope is we're good enough to win championships. The execution of it is what went wrong. So my question for people today, as you're watching this Sixers team, it's a lost season. It is what it is. They're probably not going to the playoffs. They probably shouldn't go to the playoffs. You don't want them to go to the playoffs. But if you were a fan of the process, like me, I was somebody who was supportive of the process, and I would do it again. If you told me, hey, Mike, would you sign up for that process again? Would you sign up for it? I would be the first in line with my pen saying, where can I sign? Sign me up to do that again. I will take my chances. If you were a fan of the process, would you do it again? 609-403-0973 at Mike Gill Show. You can vote. Right now the votes are coming in, and they're flipping back and forth. I mean, yes was in the lead, then no one in the lead. So it's obviously tight right now. But if you were a fan of the process, would you do it again? And I don't even have to think about it. I wouldn't even have to think about it. I would do it in a heartbeat again. You don't have to convince me. You don't have to twist my arm. There's nothing you need to say to me to say, would you do this again? I would say, you don't have to explain it to me. Yes, I would. And some people would say, why? It failed. I'm not worried about winning the championship. I can't guarantee winning the championship. But if my team is going to give me multiple years where I'm invested in the team, I'm not invested in this team anymore. Why? They stink. You're not invested when the team's no good. For the last 8 seasons, you have been invested in this team because you had belief. You had hope. Hope for a sports fan is all we could ask for. As a sports fan, hope is all we can ask for, is that I want to go into the season. Like right now, I'm a big basketball fan. My hope is taken from me. Do I think the Sixers were going to win a championship this year? Not really. But I was hopeful. As a sports fan, I want my team to win a championship. But I also want my team to give me April, May, June nights where I can hang out with my friends and watch games together as friends, community. That's what I want from my team. And if they happen to win a championship, that's great. I mean, the Eagles just won the Super Bowl. I had to go to work the next day. So give me as many nights as possible that I can have hope that my team can keep advancing. If they play on Wednesday night and I have to work the next day, but if they win on Wednesday and then they have another playoff game on Friday and I can call my buddies up and say, yo, we're going to go watch Sixers Game 5 at this place. Do you guys want to go tonight? That's what I'm going to miss this year. Yes, I want to win a championship, but what I'm going to miss more is the fact that you have no hope or opportunity to even try to win that championship. So I would sign up for that process again, because if it gave me the 18 season, the 19 season, the 20 season, the 21 season, the 22 season, the 23 season, the 24 season, I got 7 chances to say, yo, playoffs, let's go. What's my schedule look like? What am I scheduling around? And I'm going to miss it. I'm really going to miss this April, May, June, not having that. It sucks. But here's another reason I would sign up instantaneously. Because the Sixers made so many mistakes along the way. I don't know that they're going to make those mistakes again. You go back and say, man, they could have had this guy, and this guy. But guess what? If you were a guy who was not a fan of the process, what if they did take the right guys? I bet you would have changed your tune pretty quickly. You can't say you would do it or not do it based on the result. If the Sixers ended up with the guys that maybe they should have taken, let's just play this game. At pick 11, they took Michael Carter-Williams. What if they took Giannis Antetokounmpo instead? I bet you'd be a fan of the process then. If they landed Giannis Antetokounmpo at pick 11 instead of Michael Carter-Williams, I think you'd be pretty happy with that. So, yes, if you had the opportunity to do it again, you would take that opportunity because there's a chance you might make the right decisions this time around.
I'm not trying to defend the anti-processors because I don't really fall into that category, but I do think that part of the disconnect here, Mike, is that you are explaining that in your eyes that the process was not about the decisions that were made. It was about the overall big picture strategy. Whereas I think a lot of people, they directly connect the decisions made during the process to that title. And I think that's where the problem is, that you're, Mike, talking about the bigger picture, whereas a lot of people talk about the specific decisions that were made.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I get it. There were a lot of people who hated it from the get-go because they went through the multiple seasons of losing purposely for the most part. Now, a lot of those things, don't let the context get in the way of a good story here. They drafted Joel Embiid. Well, he didn't play for 2 years. If Joel Embiid was drafted and played right away, they likely wouldn't have been that bad. You saw what happened. The minute he stepped on the court, they were a serviceable team.
Well, if Joel Embiid would have played, you might not have gotten Ben Simmons.
All of the dominoes, yes, led to other things happening. Actually, Simmons also didn't play his first year.
Correct.
So
which means you would have gotten Markelle Fultz.
Right, but see, all of these things but my point is, I would sign up for it again because of the opportunities it did give you. You made mistakes during with those opportunities. But what if I didn't make the mistakes? I guarantee if they didn't make the mistakes, you wouldn't be complaining as much. You could go to every draft and say the Sixers could have done this, the Sixers could have done that. Like I said, they had a chance in the 2013 draft. They drafted Michael Carter-Williams at pick 11. They also drafted Nerlens Noel at pick number 6. I mean, let's just say at pick 6 instead of Nerlens Noel, let's say they took C.J. McCollum, who went pick 10. So what if they had McCollum and Giannis? I bet you're not complaining about the process.
Of course you're not. But at the same time, the whole point of when you are not doing well is to find somebody to blame for it.
But that's the point that I'm making here today. Going back, you said there's a lot of people who just didn't like the losing.
Correct.
Now, those people I just can't connect with. I'm sorry, I just can't come. I don't want to lose either, but I also don't want to be what I am right now. I don't want to be mediocre. I don't want to be stuck in the middle. I want a chance. The Sixers had no chance. This was a way for them to potentially get a chance. And quite frankly, they did get chances. It didn't work out the way we hoped. But for me, I would take the chance again. That's if they went back down that road and there were opportunities that maybe they take the right guys this time. They missed on a lot of guys. Nerlens Noel, many people thought he should have been the first pick in the draft. He got hurt, which made him slide to number 6, and that's how the Sixers got him at 6. Then they take Michael Carter-Williams, who, by the way, was the rookie of the year that year. But behind him in the draft was Steven Adams, a really good player. Kelly Olynyk, who turned out to be a decent player. Giannis Antetokounmpo got picked at number 15. If they end up taking Antetokounmpo at 11 instead of Michael Carter-Williams, how this whole thing would be different. There's so many, obviously, coulda, shoulda, woulda difference. The following year, well, they take Joel Embiid at number 3. That fell to them because he had some injury problems.
Right.
They get, I don't want to say lucky, but they get the best player in that draft. Later on in the draft, they ended up taking Dario Saric, but in that same draft, then Saric was a solid player. He didn't turn out to be what a lot of people had hoped for, but Zach LaVine was the next pick in that draft. So if you had a chance to do it again, what if you ended up with him? Or Clint Capella, who was in that draft. Bogan Bogdanovic was in that draft. So there are players that were available to you that you could have gotten that would have changed the fortunes of a lot of things. You could go through every single draft and, the very next year. Now,
Right.
They took Jahlil Okafor, but what if they took Porzingis instead of Okafor? I think the people would be saying, I would sign up for the process again. The problem that you have with it is they didn't make a lot of the right decisions.
Right, and I think for a lot of people, they can't separate the two. It's the
Devin Booker was in that draft, by the way.
Yes, he was at Kentucky. It's the idea of, I'm reading that book, The Why Is Everything, Mike. It's about the Mike and Kyle Shanahan, coaching tree. And one of the things they talk about, they teach all their coaches, your Sean McVays, your Kyle Shanahans, all those coaches who came from that, was that they tell them the result might not be what you want, but is the process to get to the result the right process? And if the process, in this case, is the right strategy, the outcome you get from it might not be right, but it doesn't make your method to get there wrong.
Absolutely. It's well thought out. What they did, I would sign up for again.
And
the results of what they did, I'm not thrilled with.
Right.
But I would take my chances again, having the opportunity to select the most talented player.
Because guess what? You know who went through a process and is benefiting from it right now? The Oklahoma City Thunder.
Oklahoma City right now essentially was worse than the Sixers were for a longer period. I mean, they've been bad for a long time. They had some mediocre years with Westbrook after Durant left.
But once they moved on from Westbrook, they went tankeroni. I mean, they went deep into the hole.
Yeah, but the difference between, and by the way, they haven't won a championship
Nope.
yet, but they are generally the best team in the league.
This is the second time that they've tanked that organization. There's two different times now they have tanked. They've gone to the hell. They've said, well, I'm going to sacrifice a year or two or three. And two different times they've benefited because they've walked out with elite talent.
Right. So right now, Oklahoma City is a team that is probably the best team in the league. Why? Because they made a concerted effort to basically tank a bunch of years, and now they've accumulated so much talent, they don't even know what to do with it.
Right.
They actually have too many good players. I think that's one of their problems. They have too many talented players because they've made too many good decisions.
Right. Like the one story I was listening to this morning was the idea that what if OKC trades some of their players this offseason for Kevin Durant?
Yeah, it's almost like they need to get the veteran player to finish their process as opposed to all these young guys kind of growing together. They need that final piece of their puzzle. I go back to some of the decisions in the draft. Well, the one year they took Ben Simmons, and he was the consensus number one. Everybody was on board with that. But what if they took Jaylen Brown?
Or Brandon Ingram?
One of the two. I'm just saying, Jaylen Brown has won a championship.
I just remember sitting here in the studio with you talking about Brandon Ingram that year.
The fact that they were that bad, it put them in position to get a player like Jaylen Brown, as opposed to, let's say they're in the middle of the draft, like they're they're 42 and 42, and they're drafting, 18th, 19th, 20th. Well, that level of player is not there for you. But if they took Jaylen Brown instead of Ben Simmons, what if? Now, everybody out there, they wouldn't have done that. I understand that. But my point is, I'm not talking about these particular players. I'm talking about those level of players.
Right.
The reason they lost was to get in line to have the ability to select this level of player. They took the wrong guy, or the guy they took just didn't work out. But I would sign up to do it again as opposed to what I'm going through right now. This season, there's 20 games. They're not bad enough.
Because there's no hope right now.
No hope.
There, you have taken any hopes and dreams and aspirations, and you've burned it.
John from the Villa says, Mike, I'd be second in line behind you. The process got us an exciting player. Players, if you include Benson, to sign me up for the process, take two. I'm actually surprised at the messaging we're getting here. Glenn from Northfield says, I would definitely do the process again. Interesting. Okay, 2 in a row. Mike, the process was an affront to fans in the sport. I would never want to go through that again. Now, had they slashed ticket prices commensurate with the talent, then at least they would be fair. But they slashed payroll, raised prices, changed jerseys every year, and gouged fans to put on a bad practice product on purpose. I don't know. The ticket prices were not what they are now. That I don't think. I went to the process games almost. I went to half the games.
I think the ticket prices are way higher
the
now.
ticket prices were not. I don't think they were ridiculous. I don't remember them changing jerseys. I remember them changing jerseys in the Embiid and Simmons eras. I don't remember them doing that during the process year, so I can't agree with that. Mike, cool with the process. How do you go 0 for 3 in top picks? That's impossible. So another person who said, if you were a fan of the process, would you sign up to do it again? Jason and Kate May. Mike, I agree with you 100%. I would do the process again in a heartbeat. These idiots who were in charge just screwed it up as bad as you possibly could, and it was multiple people in charge that made mistake after mistake. But the odds of making every single wrong decision, except for Joel Embiid, happening again is pretty slim. Jason, amen to that. I just, you look back and say, these were some of the players you had an opportunity to get. You go to the Fultz draft. If anybody other than Brian Colangelo was in charge,
right,
maybe you don't make that trade. And you might still end up with Markelle Fultz because I think if the Celtics picked number 1, they still would have taken Tatum. So even if you don't make that trade. But my point is, if you are at number 3 and someone else is in charge, maybe somebody else takes Fultz at number 2.
Or maybe
and then you end up with De'Aaron Fox, or you end up with Lauri Markkanen,
right,
or you end up with Lonzo Ball, although he's been hurt a lot.
Or even better, maybe you turn that number 3 overall pick and you turn it into more picks.
Right. Like the one thing I always said about Hinkie was he would never have traded a first-round pick to move up to number 1. That would never have happened. So he would have stayed at 3.
Or he would have gotten more picks to move down a pick or 2.
Yeah, I mean, even if he just stayed at 3, I don't know that he takes Fultz. I don't know that Fultz is even there for him. Fultz might go 2 to the Lakers, and now
maybe get Ball.
You have a different option of, okay, De'Aaron Fox, Lauri Markkanen, Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, like Ball was there. You have a bunch of different choices all of a sudden that now open up to you that if you did not sign up for the process, those guys are not there for you in those situations. So, yes, I sign up all the time, every time, when I'm in no man's land. I'm not just signing up for it just to do it. It's not fun. But if I'm in no man's land, that's better than no man's land. Being bad to get good is better than being in no man's land right now.
And just one more thing before we hit the break. I just want to say this again. I have a buddy of mine. He texts me every Sixers game, Mike. And he has said to me multiple times this year, I had more fun watching the process Sixers because they were trying. He says, I hate this team because they don't try.
They tried last night. They did try last night.
They did.
They did try last night. 609-403-0973. Hit me up on the text board. If you were a fan of the process, would you do it again? Vote at Mike Gill Show on the X platform. Watch the show on the X platform and on YouTube at Mike Gill Show. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can watch the show live each and every day. Coming up, Keith Smith covers the NBA. What is he hearing about Joel Embiid? Could we have seen the last of him, at least for this year? That and more on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. All right, 2:30. Keith Smith's here to talk a little NBA. Back half of the season, Sixers seemingly are out of it, which is probably a good thing. What's next for them? Paul George says he's done with the podcast. No more podcast P. Not great optics for Paul George. That and more with Keith Smith from SpotTrack.com, who covers the NBA, at Keith Smith NBA on the X platform, which is where you can watch today's show, and on the YouTube channel at Mike Gill Show. Follow along and be a part of the show. We'll get into all the big NBA news right now with Keith as we are getting ready, really for what is the first time in a long time, Keith, where the Sixers essentially will not be a part of the playoffs. And you hear what Paul George said the other night. He wants to, he's pausing the podcast essentially to try to focus up and get ready to try to help this team make the playoffs. But should the Sixers be letting Paul George and the rest of these guys take that shot?
Yeah, in my opinion, no. I think we're at a spot in this season for the Sixers where, at best, you're going to be the 10th seed. And that means winning twice in the play-in tournament on the road, and then going and facing the Cavs in the first round. Like, hey, what does that get you? I don't think anybody's gonna be jumping up and down if, hey, great, we went and played Cleveland in the first round. It's just not going anywhere good. And the other way now, getting as low as the fifth. I mean, if Portland keeps winning, maybe the fourth pick. All these examples of climbing up in the draft order and keeping your draft pick and getting a chance at adding a young player who can really help going forward. Shut these guys down, let them get whatever surgery rest they need, get healthy, get after it this summer, and see what you can do to improve the roster and get after it next season.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this team at the beginning of the year, Keith, and now you see what they've become, should this be a surprise, or are you saying, this is something that you should have seen coming?
I don't know if you should have seen it coming. I think this is one of those things. I remember we talked about it after the Paul George edition of, hey, this can go great, but there was a little bit of caution of this is how it could go wrong. And the way it could go wrong is Paul George has a lengthy injury history. He's an older player. Joel Embiid has a lengthy injury history, tends to miss games. And that was our concern, was you put a lot of money into those two guys and Tyrese Maxey, and that left, all right, well, we're going to fill out the bench as best we can around those guys. There's been some hits. There's been some misses with that. But ultimately, if you're not going to have your star guys, it's probably going to crumble on you, and that's exactly what's happened. So I don't know that anybody should be crowing of, I told you this was going to be how it goes. But I do think, a lot of us were kind of the position of, this could get a little sideways here.
Even with what they have, no Embiid, obviously, he's been in and out. He's only played, I think, 19 games. Should they be this bad?
No, probably not. And I think part of that is Paul George has just had a miserable season this year. This is, one of the worst seasons he's had since he's kind of come to prominence as a player. And I'm sure some of that is injury related, but your worry now is players of his age, when they lose it, it doesn't always come back unless it's very clear, the guy had, X injury that he's going to miss half the season. That's why it was a down year. And they come back from it. This is more looks like some things are just starting to go on him. And I think we're also at a point where if you get, much more than 50, 60 games out of him, that's going to be, all right, well, we had a pretty good year as far as availability goes, but he doesn't look as explosive. He doesn't look as quick. His shot has really, struggled with that. So this has been a tough year, all around for him. And I think, this is the concern, because if Embiid was out and Paul George was playing, Paul George all-NBA type level guy, you're probably, in the mix to be, you're probably still, out of the top six, but you're probably in the mix to be, higher in the play-in tournament and feel a little bit better about, all right, let's get through this. But he just hasn't been good enough. It's really kind of been the Tyrese Maxey show, and some younger role players have stepped up and had nice years. But I mean, if that's what you're relying on, that's not going to be enough to win regularly.
Well, and Keith, last night you saw, last night you get a 30-point night from Maxey. You get a 25-point night from George. That's where it's like, and if you have Embiid and he gives you 30, and then those other guys that you brought in, the Caleb Martins, the Oubres, that's what this was supposed to be. Maxey, George, Embiid, the three guys scoring 25, 20, 30, and then the other guys just getting 7, 9, 10, and that's tough to contend with.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the idea was. The idea was we have these three guys. We have a guard, a wing, and a big. They all complement each other. They're all guys who are very willing to move the ball, and they can all shoot. They can all score. They in multiple ways. It should have been this grouping that, if healthy, would all come together. And then Joel Embiid, personally, I don't think he's been healthy all season long. I don't think I'm going out on a limb there. Clearly probably should not have played in the Olympics. I think we can all agree on that at this point. And, and then, Paul George, gets hurt in the preseason with the knee thing. Tyrese Maxey gets, worn down because he was having to do everything. And that's why I always say there's a huge difference between playing a lot of minutes and a guy who is playing a lot of minutes and doing everything. And that's what Maxey was having to do. Early, he got worn down, and you've had very few games with all three guys together. When they have been together, it's been, kind of, mixed bag, but it's such small sample size. We don't really know. But, yeah, nothing has really gone right other than, nice surprises like Justin Edwards becoming a player who looks like he can be somebody you can, have in your rotation moving forward. Maxey's had a nice season as well, but, a lot of these things, have kind of gone sideways. Even the depth moves. Andre Drummond didn't work out. Eric Gordon, he was really coming on before this most recent injury, but he hasn't worked out. Kyle Lowry looks like that kind of finished. Caleb Martin didn't work out to the extent that he got traded. So it's just, kind of an example of, man, when things go, or I guess when it rains, it pours, and boy, it's been raining for a while.
Sure has, which leads us into the next thing is you saw last night a little bit of Maxey and George putting it up. They hung with the Knicks. They're down. They got back. George had a good fourth, carried them back into the game. Do you try to take another roll of the dice with these guys if you're Daryl Morey, or do you look to see if anybody's willing to take Paul George and potentially Joel Embiid?
I think with Paul George, because he's not somebody you have been super duper invested with for years and kind of built everything around, I think you at least see, hey, is there interest out there? Does somebody want to do that? Now, I'm not doing that in one of those types of moves where it is, all right, we're going to give up, 2 first-round picks in the future to get off his contract or anything like that. It's, you're better off, seeing if you can get him right and making it work in that situation. Then the Embiid conversation it's so tough. I've seen a lot of people over the last couple of weeks saying, well, that's, the worst contract in the NBA now. He's completely untradeable. And my thing is, there will always be some team that will either, trick themselves into saying, well, if we get Embiid, we can get him right. He'll play 70 games, for us, and, we'll get him there, and that'll be fine. And then there's going to be other teams that will say, we're actually okay if he plays 40 or 50 games because we've got enough depth to get by it. And if we can have him in the playoffs and he can play a lesser role, that's where it'll be. But if you're Philly, I just don't know if they're ready to do that yet. I think that's going to be one where I think it's more likely we're going to go into the offseason, we're going to retool around Maxey, George, and Embiid, and everybody else, fair game, and we'll see what we can do, with maybe moving them or trying to get, value for them in a trade or something like that, or rebalancing type trades around the three main stars, because I just don't know that you're going to be able to get, enough value back for them in trades to make it worth it right now.
Yeah, Keith Smith's with us. SpotTrack.com covers the NBA, at Keith Smith NBA on the X platform. Some of the stuff that's coming out here, I want to get your take on. What do you make of what Embiid's future could look like? I mean, Marcus Hayes of the Inquirer put out a wild suggestion that a radical suggestion by doctors, including a meniscus removal, suggesting the breaking and resetting of his hip to change the angle and pressure on his knee for Joel Embiid. Another article from Jake Fisher basically suggested that no one on the medical staff or any external doctors throughout this are able to pinpoint a clear-cut pathway to Embiid. It seems that any other team is going to listen to any of those type of things and say, I want to invest in this guy. So it almost sounds like you're stuck with him.
Yeah, I think you got to figure out what's the best way moving forward. Is the best way get him on the floor for 50, 60 games and see if we can figure that out? Is the best way to have some form of surgical, option that gets him really in a spot where, all right, this can to at least some level fix this. I don't know that there's a, do this surgery, rehab, and you're coming back, perfectly fine. I don't know that exists, that world. But I think that would have to be the conversations you have is, can something like that happen? Or do we just have to live in a world where it is, all right, Joel Embiid is going to miss, several games a year. It's going to be, a situation where he's going to be out a lot, and we just have to deal with it and try to, get the most out of him when he is available.
So all of these conversations lead to the question for you, Keith Smith. Is Daryl Morey, in your opinion, in trouble? Should he be in trouble? Or do you think he's the right guy to figure out how to clean this mess up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there is a chance, he's in a little bit of trouble here. I think, it's kind of, when you're in an ownership position, you look at two things, right? It's, will a coaching change fix everything? Because, as the old, adage goes, you can't fire all the players, so you fire the coach. So is that going to fix everything? Or the next thing you look at is, all right, do we have the right guy putting this roster together? And there's going to be some questions asked as far as, hey, you planned for a whole year. Last year, we didn't make any big trades because we wanted to maintain our cap space and we wanted to make sure we could chase big free agents. And you sold us on Paul George is the big free agent to go get. We're going to bring him in, and he's going to be the right guy with Embiid and Maxey. And here we are, with the worst record we've had since, the process seasons when it was all the rebuilding was happening. And now I think you got to look at it and say, all right, someone is going to, lose a job over this somewhere. That's what NBA history tells me, whether that's Daryl Morey or that's Nick Nurse. But somebody's probably not coming back next year because I think most of the players will be back.
Well, that's interesting. I want to get your take on, Josh Harris, by the way, is not very well liked right now. I have a hard time pointing the finger at Harris. Maybe I'm looking at this wrong. I mean, as an owner, it's murky because of how they started here, right? The process and, so people were turned off by that. But I want to get your take as somebody who covers the whole league and looks at this. I feel like Harris has done everything. They've tried everything. It just hasn't worked for whatever reason. Keith, you and I have been talking about for years. They make a trade, and we're like, that's a great trade for them, and that move is a great move. And then in the end, we're like, man, it didn't work out. I mean, Ben Simmons doesn't want to be here. You turn it into James Harden. I mean, it seems that he has signed off on everything to try to improve the team. But do you look at Harris and the ownership group as a problem, and how are they viewed in the NBA?
Yeah, they're not viewed very highly, I think, because you have a mix of people there. You have some front office folks who still don't like the way things were handled all the way back to Sam Hinkie. Then you have other sides where it was they didn't like that the Hinkie experiment was allowed to go as long as it did. Then you have from the player side, it felt like, hey, for a while it was shuttle guys in, shuttle guys out. We don't really care, about this, and we're gonna do all these things to just keep moving it around. And the only kind of consistency through all of that has been Josh Harris and the ownership group. So I do think there are some folks out there who are, they don't think very highly of them. On the other side, people are like, hey, they do try, right? They signed off on the Paul George acquisition. They signed off on let's go big to try to build this roster out around Joel Embiid. They've tried doing other things. They've paid the luxury tax in the past. They've done all this stuff, and some people are like, it's maybe the fatal flaw is they're not picking the right people, but that's maybe a problem for ownership. But the fact is, at the end of the day, what you really want ownership to do is hopefully hire the right people and then write really big checks and stay out of it. And I think for the most part, they've tried to stay out of it. It's just been, are the right people in place, working underneath them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the confounding part about this. It's like, hey, yes, they lost for a couple of years, but once they started winning, they made moves. They made trades. They went and got Tobias Harris. They went and got Jimmy Butler. They fired Brett Brown. They brought in a championship coach in Doc Rivers. Okay, that didn't work out. We fired Doc Rivers. We bring in another guy who's won a championship. They signed Paul George. I mean, almost every move they've made has been applauded by people like yourself and people who cover the league, and the fans didn't seem to have a big problem. It is a weird dynamic. I get the whole beginning of the thing of how it started here, but once it got off the ground, they have tried. It just have you ever seen a situation that has gone so awry with moves that were generally applauded at the time?
Yeah, not with that. That's the thing. It's, everybody, you look at them long enough, especially if they do the job for a while, they're going to have a few that went sideways on them. But this has been like move after move after move. And like you said, none of these were ones where we're like, oh, God, what were they thinking? This was, a horrendous decision here. For the most part, it was like, all right, I kind of get, why they did this. I get why they, when the Ben Simmons thing went sideways, why they traded him and got James Harden. That's a good addition. The Paul George acquisition this summer, like all those things felt like, all right, these are, positive moves. I think even, if you were worried about the Paul George situation, you were fair to be worried about it, but, thinking it would turn out this way, nobody thought that. And that's the tough part of this is it's just been move after move after move that have gone wrong. And I don't know if, some people have said, well, maybe it is time to really just wipe the slate clean with everybody involved, start all over again, players, coach, front office, all of it, and start, completely from scratch. But challenge is once you're locked into these big contracts, to kind of circle back to what we said before, It's finding the right way to get out of those to start over.
Keith Smith covers the NBA at Keith Smith NBA on Twitter. Follow all of his work, SpotTrack.com, and the NBA season looks like it will not include the Sixers in the postseason. Probably a good thing this year. Now they need to hope they don't fall out of the top 6 with that pick. That would be another disaster. We'll talk more NBA with Keith down the line. Thank you, buddy.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
As always, great perspective from Keith Smith as a guy who's kind of out of the market to give you some look at it. Covers the entire NBA. An untradeable contract for Joel. 609-403-0973. If you were a fan of the process, would you sign up to do it again? I'm first in line. Sign me back up. I'll take my chances. What say you? Vote now at Mike Gill Show on Twitter, X. Right now, the votes are close. It's 40-59. We'll update the poll on the other side throughout the day. Would you do the process all over again? Get back to me. Hit me up. More Sports Bash coming up on 97.3 ESPN. 2:53 Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. I'll update the poll question for you right now. If you are a Sixers fan who was a fan of the process, would you do it again? At Mike Gill Show, the votes are coming in. Got a couple hours left to vote. What do you think's winning right now, Josh?
I think the winning right now is probably going to be the no, but I think there's still some people who have some, maybe a little PTSD about what happened.
59% no, 40% yes. So 59.4, 40.6. So about 60-40 split right now says they would not do it again.
Is that about what you would expect?
Don't know, actually. I think a lot of people who were supportive of the process would do it again. So I would think that now we got a lot of text messages. Most of those people have said they would do it again. Most of these people on the text board have said they would sign up and do it again. Now, the X audience seemingly is on the opposite.
Well, we know social media is a cesspool, so.
That's why it is a little surprising. The text board is open, 609-403-0973. Mike, I would not do the process again. It was a total failure in my judgment. Did you support it, though? That's the question. It wasn't a total failure. It just didn't do what you wanted it to do, win a championship. Evan Cohen from the morning show Unsportsmanlike is coming up next right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Stick around. See what happens when the football season ends. We're talking about tush pushes and podcasting. Did the front office tell Paul George to shut down his podcast? No, if they were smart, they'd say, hey, put it on 5 days a week. You might have more time preparing for the podcast than you do the game, and that's what we need right now. There's a lot that goes into getting ready for a podcast. Believe me, it's not easy just to podcast. You got to produce the thing, you got to do post-production, you got to put the clips out there, you got to get all the information. Podcast P, do the podcast more days, not less. Sports Bass Live, 97.3 ESPN. That was Chris Canty this morning on Unsportsmanlike right here on 97.3 ESPN. Evan Cohen, the host of Unsportsmanlike, is set to join us. But that's what happens when football season ends. You're talking tush push and podcasting. That's not good. That's why we need football back. We got the combine and all that stuff going on. The Eagles are Super Bowl champions, which is the last time I saw Evan Cohen. I'll remind him that the Eagles won the Super Bowl. So all of that is good, but what is happening here with the basketball team? Not so good to the point we're talking about podcasting. I mean, really? Podcasting, not practice, podcasting here. Paul George, the podcast. Is this a problem? Is this really something?
It is, because it represents a lot of the Paul George era in Philly. And by the way, I want to point out, just for anybody who is unaware, which I'm sure, obviously a million people listen to your show at a million different times. The last time I was on with you was, yes, in person at the Super Bowl, when I had to run after you in the bathroom. You were going to the bathroom. You were about to go to the bathroom, and I had to run after you to stop you, to get your attention. And then mid-sentence, you said, listen, I really got to go. Because we were right outside the men's bathroom at this convention center in New Orleans, and you were on the way in, and I stopped you. Anyway.
Hey, man, at 48 years old, when you got to go, you don't have much time to hold. You got to go.
Oh, I know. I'm not much I'm not much younger. So, all right. So here's why I say it is something. First of all, you and I are media geeks. I do wonder what his contract states with the podcast, because if they're shutting everybody down at some point and they're going to be a lottery team, I kind of want to know what he says. And if I'm hiring him to do the podcast, now is actually the most interesting time. Having lost 9 in a row and 1-10 in February. But Mike, here's why I've been very critical of the Sixers. On the day they signed Joel Embiid to a contract extension, we went on our show and Chris Canty said, I'm sorry, why are they doing this? Why do they need to do this right now? Who's bidding against them for Embiid? Why do they need to do it this way? So we questioned it then. On the day that Paul George ultimately signed with the Sixers, on his podcast right after that, he basically made it very clear he wanted to be a Clipper. So you have your best player, who you didn't really need to sign to a contract extension in that moment, and you have your second best player who didn't want to be there, and your third best player, at least as you valued them, should have been the focal point of the team. And they didn't, and that's Maxey, of course. And they didn't do any of that. They're a complete mess. I don't personally believe the guy who's running the team and Daryl Morey is the one to get them out of the mess. And I don't know what Nick Nurse is supposed to do at this point, coaching this team.
Yeah, I was going to bring up, there was a conversation you were having earlier in the week. Tim Legler brought up, this isn't on Morey. It's a real weird dynamic that we can kind of get into, but you believe that this is actually on Morey, more so because everybody wants to point the finger somewhere. Embiid's being hurt. Somebody gave him the contract. I don't know, did they give him the contract to try to lure a free agent saying he's going to be here for the long term? Was that part of the – who knows? But why do you think this is more on Morey than anybody else?
Okay, good question. So here's why. So this is not Daryl Morey's fault, what I'm about to say. This is reality. I don't know a person in sports, coach or executive, Mike, who gets more praise and credit than Daryl Morey, who hasn't won a title or hasn't even been to the finals. Think about a coach or an executive, any team, anywhere, not just Philly, anywhere, that gets more praise than Daryl Morey, who has never been to the finals. Super Bowl, World Series, whatever it may be. Oh, he's so brilliant. Nobody's better at putting a roster together. He doesn't even worry about the player chemistry. He started the Sloan Analytics Conference. This guy is way beyond his years. Oh, he's always can get the superstar. Look at him. Look at how many guys he gets. Cool. What has that done? Like, Daryl Morey may have the second best resume of superstars aligned with outside of LeBron James. If you build the all Daryl Morey team between the Rockets and the Sixers and guys that he has employed, it's unbelievable. And he has not won anything. Sam Presti with Oklahoma City gets a ton of praise. Sam Presti went to the NBA Finals with OKC. They lost to Miami, but at least he got there as an executive. So why is it that I'm supposed to trust that Daryl Morey is going to get this team out of this and get them into where they obviously are paying Joel Embiid to get them to, the NBA Finals? You tell me, do you believe he's going to be – because Nick Nurse at least can say, well, wait a minute. You give me the right roster, I can win you a championship. He did it in Toronto. You tell me, who knows it way better than I do, why is Morey to get them the guy to get them out of this?
Evan Cohen's with us from Unsportsmanlike. I don't even know where to start with because, all right, so we have been here since the beginning. They lose for multiple years. They end up getting some guys. They go from 28 wins to 52 wins. From that point on, they are a legitimate contender. A lot of disappointing losses.
No, they're not. No, wait. I'm sorry to interrupt. What team that never gets past the second round is a legit contender?
In hindsight, you might say that's not legit. But when the season or the playoffs begin, they generally have been a team that most of the NBA world would say that's a team that can win a title. Yes or no?
Yes, but now let's look at fact. Based on result, were they ever truly a contender? They have, based on result.
They lost. That's the Toronto series with Jimmy Butler. I mean, it's a double doink.
But that was
Who knows
the second round, wasn't it?
Right, but I'm saying if they win that game, maybe they go to the NBA Finals.
Right, but they didn't. Right?
No, but to say that, you said when of those teams, which was a legit, I think that Jimmy Butler team legitimately could have won. They just didn't beat Toronto.
Okay, but if we look back on it, okay, and maybe you want to poll the audience on this because this could be a good, not to tell you what to do. I'm just saying I'm actually fascinated by this. Looking back on it, in the Joel Embiid era, have the Philadelphia 76ers ever actually been a contender? Playing results.
If you're saying results, Bice, if you can't get out of the second round, then no. I mean, they lost to a Toronto team that ended up winning a title. So they pushed the team that won the title to a seventh game. Mm-hmm. They had another seventh game against a Boston team that went to the finals. So
and that seventh game was a nightmare with Harden and Embiid.
Absolutely. So were they – I don't know. I don't know how you would describe them, but they have been a team that most the NBA types, your win horses and your legglers, when you talk to them, say, yes, that team could win a title. Now, they ended disappointingly. Totally agree with that sentiment. But I think, Evan, this is where it's odd, and I want to get your take on this. Any deal that has been made over the years, they go get Tobias Harris. That's a good move. They get Jimmy Butler. That's a good move. They trade Simmons for Harden. That's a good move. They get Doc Rivers. That's a good move. They fired Doc Rivers. That's a good move. They hired Nurse. That's a good move. There have been moves over moves after move, and generally everybody says, oh, they did a good job there. They signed Al Horford. People actually liked that, and then it didn't work. And then they found a way to get out of the Horford contract that nobody thought they could do. There is, in the time that I have hosted this show, most people have said, I like what they've done, and nothing has seemed to work. You can't even write the script to be this bizarre.
Okay. Very fair in what you're saying.
Has there been a move that they've made that you look back at and say, what? I mean, no, the Markelle Fultz move. That one blows up in their face.
I'm going to give it to you. Hiring Daryl Morey. I said it. You know I've been saying this to you for as long as I've known you, for the few years now. You and I have sat here and we've argued about the Daryl Morey level of expertise and what he's good at and what he's not good at. See, the Sixers to me were already relevant. If I was a team that's completely irrelevant right now, if I was a team that had nothing going for him right now, okay, I can understand you bringing Daryl Morey because he's going to go find a way to get you stars and make you relevant. The moment you're relevant, that's when I need a general manager to put me over the top. That's not him, right? And so I think that Embiid and the Sixers have to break up. I think that obviously has to happen. They have
It can't happen now, right? It can't happen now.
Well, after the season it can. But
who's taking that contract?
Somebody that wants to give up another bad contract. Phoenix for Bradley Beal. A team that has nothing going for him, like Chicago, right? Just a team that's like, all right, we have nothing to lose by doing this, right? So we can play trade machine all day. I'm sure we will, hopefully you and I in June and July. Let's sign up for that. But the point is, I don't even want to take shots at Embiid. I want to just say they tried it both ways. It didn't work. Any part of the process needs to be eliminated. Morey is tied to the process. Let's not get that twisted, right? He wasn't Sam Hinkie's his guy. So any part of this needs to be removed. And here's the most amazing thing about your basketball team. Most teams that are a mess, the Phoenix Suns, let's say as an example, have no hope but to trade away their stars. They have no hope. They have to just get new stuff in there. The fascinating part about the Philadelphia 76ers, I truly believe there is a path for them to be an unbelievably likable, respectable basketball team. Let me lay it out for you.
This team is the least likable team in 25 years.
100%. Let me make it likable for you in a month. Here we go. Or maybe, in July is that month. Here it is. Okay. Number 1, Daryl Morey. Goodbye. Now, I believe Daryl Morey will get rid of the Sixers before they get rid of him. I could totally see him going to another team, and they're like, well, what just happened here? Wouldn't shock me at all. And they should let him go. Then you make the obvious move, which everybody's talked about, and Josh Harris goes and gets Bob Myers. And Bob Myers, who runs his football team or helped him hire for football, doesn't even have to be the general manager or can just be the general manager for the summer. Like, hey, can you just put this thing and hire the GM? If you want to keep Nick Nurse, keep Nick Nurse. If you want to bring in a new coach, bring in a new coach. Bob, please just put this together. And then you're going to look at 2 guys. And you're going to say, look at the way Tyrese Maxey plays and look at the way Jared McCain plays. And this is not an X's and O's thing, Mike. This is just how Bob Myers operates. They play with joy. The Commanders operate with joy. They're not the Eagles. The Eagles are the best. The Commanders are not. I'm going to respect that, of course. And I love Jalen Hurts. You know that. But bring guys to the team every night that play with a smile on their face. And if they could play 82 games, they would. Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain. That's where you start. And if you have to not necessarily get perfect top dollar value for Embiid and Paul George, you do it. You make the trade. Even if you're taking on other bad contracts, but multiple instead of one, you make that deal. And you build around Maxey, you build around McCain, and you build it like the Warriors a little bit, like Myers did, with the joy and not the misery that they're going into right now.
Evan Collins with us from Unsportsmanlike weekday mornings right here on 97.3 ESPN 6 to 10. We've asked the people, if you were a fan of the process, would you do it again? Oddly, the text board is highly in favor that they would do it again. A lot of people said I was a fan of it the first time, and yes, I would do it again. I am one of those people. Am I nuts?
Why would you do it again? You know it didn't work. You're giving yourself an out. I don't understand.
It only didn't work because you made so many mistakes. You can't make that many mistakes again. It's impossible. It's impossible to make that many mistakes again.
Okay, I see the text on the screen, right? 609-403-0973. Let's go get the text in. I see it out there, all right? Can you put another one? I don't know how easy this is. Were the Sixers ever contenders during the Joel Embiid era?
All right. We will see that. I think most people, and here's the thing. I think what you're saying to most of the Sixer fans resonates. Mm-hmm. That they never got out of the second round, and therefore they were never contenders. And I think most people agree with you on that.
No, but you're right how you're afraid. Okay, let's combine our takes, because I think combined we have something good here. If we combine the takes, what we're saying together is, in the moment, for many of the Embiid years, they always felt like contenders. But after the fact, we know they never actually contended. In the moment, during the Embiid years, they always felt like contenders. But after the fact, we know now they never really contended.
Yes, after. Now, as you said, as you said, they lost in the second round, which would, in your mind, say then they were not a real contender. But sometimes in the second round, you play a team that ends up winning the title and give that team the best series.
Okay. Right. So were the Rams contenders this year?
I hear you are. What do you feel like? Matthew Stafford is with the Rams. Why would you leave the Rams? You're one play away from leaving the Eagles.
I agree with you, but like, I don't know that the Rams may have matched up best with the Eagles. The Eagles still won. The Eagles still kicked everyone's butt. They were by far the best team in the NFL this year. But I don't know. I mean, like the Rams this year.
Yeah.
It's actually we got lucky on this. This is a great example on this. The Rams this year, minus the Super Bowls that they went in previously, was like the maxed out version of Embiid. Do you think any Eagles fan listening to 97.3 right now is like, oh, God, we're really worried about the Rams next year? And they may be really good. They're not thinking about them. They're thinking about the Eagles first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. They're thinking about, all right, what are the Commanders going to do in free agency? That's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about the Rams. The Rams this year were the maxed out version of Embiid.
The Rams didn't have the expectations coming in, so they were kind of like low-key under the radar, and then they get there and they play a tough game. They're going to be the team. Now, it depends on what happens with Stafford, right? If Stafford leaves, which I don't know why, you're right there. You were right there. Why would you want to then move on from your quarterback? That's why it's a bizarre situation. You want to downgrade at the spot that allowed you to become a contender.
I agree. But I guess that's your argument against trading Embiid.
Embiid's problem, the problem with Embiid is the injuries. You can't count on him. If you told me he was healthy and he was making it through the whole season, of course you're saying, now I'll take my shot. But that's never happened. And that is the head. Here's an interesting thing. I want to get your take on this. Josh Harris owns the Commanders, which has now turned him into like public enemy number one by the Sixers fans. They hate him because he owns the Commanders.
Right.
But would you say that he has been a poor owner for the Sixers? I mean, again, everything that they've tried everything. You want to get Jimmy Butler? Fine. You want to sign this guy? Fine. You want to hire this guy? Okay. Like, they have tried everything. He's never said, no, can't do that, can't do that. So is he a bad owner?
For the Sixers? Yes, because here's the problem.
Because he hired Morey.
No, thank you. It's now you're going to look at him in comparison to what he's done with another team. See, like Jeffrey Lurie owning the Eagles, you're not comparing him to his ownership with another team. Josh Harris, now you're comparing, why have you had so much success with the Commanders and not as much success with the Eagles? I'm sorry, with the Sixers. The Commanders got deeper into the playoffs this year than Josh Harris's teams ever have with the Philadelphia 76ers.
Which is why I said if you're a Sixers fan, you have to at least say he took an irrelevant team and made – but that's the big argument here. We got people texting in about that, which is the Sixers – and this has always been – like my take on the process, Evan, has been there is no guarantee to win titles. So when they say, hey, we're doing this to win championships, of course they have to say that. But it was a business decision. This was a dormant franchise that nobody cared about. And for the last 8 years, they have been on NBA Live, NBA Today, NBA this, NBA that. They're on ESPN. They're on Christmas Day. They sell out every night. Their jersey sales are number one. They have relevancy. That's what the process was. It was a business decision to bring people back and care. And they cared so much that on Tuesday night in February, when you lost a game in Memphis, people acted like it was an Eagles Sunday, and people wanted the coach fired. That's what they were clamoring for, to become a team that you cared about. And this season, nobody cares at all. They have become apathetic.
You just Jerry Jones me, and I don't mean that in a bad way. What you did, I don't know if you moved the goalpost, you changed the definition, and I'm not mad at you for doing it. We have this conversation on Unsportsmanlike all the time of what is the goal of Jerry Jones? Is it to win Super Bowls with Dallas, which he's done times 3? Or is it to be relevant because Jerry Jones is a 1,000-time Super Bowl winner at being relevant. And that's the goal every year. So if the goal of the Philadelphia 76ers is to be relevant, more times than not, they accomplish that.
Yeah.
Daryl Morey is very good at being relevant. He's not very good at winning championships.
Yep. I listen, I can't argue with that. I think that they want, and in that relevancy, your hope is to win a title. You can't guarantee that, but you're hoping.
How about getting to the Eastern Conference Finals?
I said at the Super Bowl, this is before I said, you know what will happen? They'll be the play-in team, and this will be the year they finally get to the Eastern Conference Finals when nobody cares about them. But that's now not going to happen.
Now you don't want that to happen. You don't want that.
Texting,
your top 6 pick.
No. Now people want them to lose. Yeah. I said the ironic part is the anti-processors who were against the process now want them to lose on purpose for a draft pick. You see the irony here? Like a Seinfeld show, we brought it back to the beginning. He's Evan Cohen. A lot of texts coming in. Here's another one. Sixers have not been contenders because every year they have failed to read any expectations. They have been overrated. We'll read off more texts that have been coming in. I know he's got to run. He's Evan Cohen. You can listen to him tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. right here on 97.3 ESPN. I wanted to talk about the tush push, but this was too good.
You're the best. Next time, but I'm all in. Keep it alive. It's ridiculous that the league is going after the Eagles for being good at that play, which everyone else cannot stop. It's absurd, and the Eagles should fight like hell to keep it.
It's not going anywhere.
But you
are. Good to see you, man.
You too. Thank you as always.
Evan Cohen, everybody, here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, live video. You could see Evan Cohen if you were watching on the video at Mike Gill Show on YouTube, at Mike Gill Show on the Twitter X platform. Join us over there and be a part of the show. That was fun. Good conversation. A lot of reaction on the text board. We're going to read the text next. You can get in 609-403-0973. If you were a fan of the process, would you sign up to do it again? 609-403-0973. Is Evan right? Daryl Morey is the biggest problem. Let us know what you think. 609-403-0973. The Sports Bash is brought to you by my friends at Game Day Men's Health. You know, 1 in 4 men over 30 in the U.S. have low testosterone levels, but you can fix that by checking out my friends over at Game Day Men's Health, Egg Harbor Township. It's easy to do, walk-in consultation, free to go, very comfortable, awesome spot. Mike's a great dude. The whole team's awesome. And they can check your levels, weight loss, vitamin wellness, ED, testosterone replacement therapy, all sorts of tricks of the trade. They're the best in the area. Guys, listen, I'm catching up to you now. I used to be the young guy doing this show. Now I'm the old guy doing this show. And with that, we got to change our mindsets. We got to do it. So go and talk to the team at Game Day Men's Health, see what they can do for you. They might have to do nothing. They might say, yo, you're healthy as a horse, man. You can get your blood work done there, peptides, all sorts of stuff. They got the great machines. One of the only in the area. Like if you've got muscle soreness, something, tennis elbow, something like that, they can work on all that kind of stuff. Game Day Men's Health, EHT, 3069 English Creek, Egg Harbor Township. More Sports Bash coming up. All right, 3:30 Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, and live video streaming on the X platform, YouTube, at Mike Gill Show. Subscribe, watch the show. We got a lot of people watching the last couple of days. Appreciate everybody out there. If you're listening on the app, you can message us through the app on your phone. Hit the Message Us feature. Josh, votes continue to come in. It's going back and forth. It's closed a little bit here. It's 58-41. It was like 60-40 before, so the graph is moving a little bit. At Mike Gill Show, if you are a Sixers fan who was a fan of the process, would you do it again? 58% say no, 41% say yes, as the votes continue to come in. The interesting thing is, though, Josh, on the text board, the listeners on the radio, those people are more yes than no.
Well, I think what happens is that people who vote on a poll are just being emotional, whereas if you force the text in, you have to verbalize your actual opinions, and now you're getting more thoughtful people on the text.
Yeah, I mean, the text people, I think, listening to the show, they're part of the fabric of the conversation, but let's read off some of the text messages here. Mike, the process died when we chose Harris over in Butler. Well, that's not really what happened. They chose Butler over Simmons.
The process died when Sam Hinkie resigned.
Yeah, when Hinkie got basically pushed out the door, that is when things went sideways. So this conversation has always come up, process, when is it? It ended when Hinkie left. He was the guy who went to the ownership group and basically was like, hey, listen, this is my plan. And the ownership group signed up for it and said, yes, we're on board. As soon as his vision was squashed, Brian Colangelo wanted nothing to do with the process. So it was a Sam Hinkie idea that never got followed through on. Now, listen, I understand Hinkie was a very polarizing guy, and in the organization, in the front office, he did a lot of things that rubbed people the wrong way. So maybe he couldn't keep kind of working with the people that worked up there. He did a lot of things by himself. He wouldn't listen to a lot of other people's ideas. He sat in his office by himself. He did all these things that kind of rubbed the organization the wrong way, I think, to a point. That being said, I would have liked to have seen which direction he would have gone with some of the decisions that Brian Colangelo made. I think Brian Colangelo was where this thing went way off the rails and turned into a disaster. Then after that, you're trying to pick up the pieces, and then you're trying to duct tape and spackle the whole thing together. And, it was like when you walk the used car lot of one of those used car places that isn't like a sanctioned place. It's like some guy on like the Black Horse Pike, but he's got a Mercedes. You're like, I really like to drive a Mercedes. And you don't even know where he got the thing, but you bought it anyway. That's kind of like what the Sixers started to do. They're just getting big-name players, and they're like, well, we got this guy on the Black Horse Pike.
Look what I found in the junkyard.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how'd you get this guy? Well, he was hanging out on the Black Horse Pike somewhere, and we picked him up. Not that those places are, it's just sometimes you walk in, you're like, where'd they get this car from? How'd they get this car so nice and for so cheap? How'd you do that?
Why you ask so many questions?
609-403-0973. If a lot of these text messages coming in, Chris in Wilmington says the Sixers have never been contenders because every year they failed to reach any expectations. They were overrated. They were the number one seed at one point. That season ended up in disappointment. Why? Ben Simmons completely lost his ability to play basketball.
He lost his mind. Just say that.
He went AWOL, is how I've kind of described it. He went AWOL in those playoffs against the Atlanta Hawks, but they were the number one seed.
Yep.
They had a great path, and they lost a series that they had no business losing to the Atlanta Hawks. And strictly because, quite frankly, Ben Simmons was so bad in that. He was historically bad from the free throw line. So I don't know how you quantify that, but that team was disappointing. But that's where I argue with Evan. I would say that team was a legitimate contender, but not with that version of Ben Simmons. So in reality, no, they ended up not being one. But when you're the number one seed, for the most part, you have a legitimate chance to win a championship. Jordan from Upper Township says, I supported it the first time, and I would do it again. The Sixers were irrelevant before. If the Colangelos didn't waste those stockpiled assets, we might be in a different place now. We still got an MVP out of it. The worst place to be in sports is no man's land. Jordan, you and I agree. I contend that this Sixers team is where they are somewhat today because of the Colangelo situation. I think the Colangelo thing absolutely was the worst decision of all the bad decisions. I think the Colangelo decision was the worst.
I don't understand how, if anyone is being objective, you can think anything else is worse than Brian Colangelo's time.
He didn't do anything good.
Like, if you're being completely objective, take out your bias, take out your whatever, Brian Colangelo did nothing right.
I can't think of one move that he made where you were like, that was a good move.
There isn't one. The man literally got the job because his daddy was shoved into a job with the organization, and he came in here and basically fumbled all of the kitchenware and smashed it on the floor, and then he tried to blame his wife for everything.
And then his wife made a burner account, or he did, and really ran it off the rails. 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. I like that one from Jordan, though. He said, I supported it the first time, I would do it again. Listen, where they are right now is one of the worst spots to be in. They're not quite the worst team in the league. They're probably, you're hopeful at this point that they could be one of the 5 worst teams in the league.
Right.
And if they're not one of the 5 worst teams in the league, now you're in big trouble because you potentially lose your pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. This season, I cannot think of a way that this thing could have gone worse for them. It's unbelievable how
this was
bad.
the worst of the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You couldn't say to any listener out there and say, listen, write for me a worst case scenario season for you. And someone say, okay, this is how it's going to go. No one could write this and make it worse. This has been the worst of the worst possible thing that could happen.
And when they finally go out there and give you a respectable NBA effort last night, they still lose the game.
Which you needed them to do. That's the only thing that's good that has happened.
Which
They
is
gave you
insane.
a respectable effort, and they lost. Very process of them. They tried hard.
Except
they
there's a lot
came
more
up
money on the
short.
court than the process.
Yes, but what you're saying before, no, that's a good thing. They tried hard, and they lost. You said, and they still lost the game. That's a good thing. At this point, you should not be wanting them to win games. You should want them
Well, you
to have
shouldn't
last.
want them to, but for whatever reason, the organization keeps trotting them out there too.
Yeah, that's confounding why you're going to play Paul George. And that, look, these guys are that's the hard part. Like this is what I hate about sports, where we've gotten. And this is why I've said, if I'm the NBA or I'm sports, I am not rewarding teams for losing. I am rewarding you for trying. So if you don't make the playoffs and you're the first team out of the playoffs, you get a better draft choice. This whole play-in thing, no one wants to play in to get into the playoffs. I want to keep winning so that I can better my draft position. I might not be good enough to get into the playoffs, but I don't want to keep losing because that's not a good plan. That's not a good business decision for my constituents. But also winning's not helping me either. Phil says, Mike, don't blame the process, blame the front office. Let's face it, the front office could not properly draft. They completely failed. Although they had a couple good years, a 1 seed, but the picks you spoke about earlier were horrible. If the Eagles drafted over the last 10 years like the Sixers would, they would constantly be a 3 and 4 win team. They missed on a lot.
Yeah.
They missed on a lot. Although, to be fair, they did get Maxey in the 21st spot, which is the anti-process. Hey, they found a guy at number 21 that worked out for them, right? The anti-process guy would say, you didn't need to be one of the worst teams. You got Maxey.
Right. But again, if you go back and look at that whole situation, that was a lot of luck. Because
Well, listen, that's the exception, not the rule. When you
Right.
get the guy down there, the whole point is you're hoping that you have the right front office pieces in place, because when you're drafting 1, 2, 3, you have the whole pool of talent.
Yep.
If you're drafting at 20 and there's smart people in front of you, Maxey shouldn't be there. So you can't depend on other teams failing constantly at decision-making to put you in position to get a Maxey. You know what I'm saying? Like Maxey, if there were other good organizations in front of you, he should be drafted ahead of 21. So you can't always depend on others failing miserably at their jobs.
Right. You can't depend on everybody else being an idiot just so you could be successful.
609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. It's time to get rid of Morey, Mike. It seems like every signing is a miss. Well, it's funny because you're right about that. It feels like everything he's done has blown up in his face, but at the time, we actually seemingly liked it. You know, like they signed – the one guy that he signed that nobody cared about was Yabusele, and he's turned out to be the best signing they have. He drafted Jared McCain. He drafted Maxey. So he's found some talent in the draft later on in the draft. Maxey's McCain's another guy that they got later on in the draft.
The problem with Morey is that there is this weird angle, like you heard from Evan Cohen, where – well, he's never won anything. And it's like, well, everybody hasn't won anything till they win, right? So it's like, you know, unless you have a bunch of executives out there who have won, who are available for you to pick up, you got to take the best option. And what Daryl Morey has done well is he got you out of the Al Horford contract. You mentioned about Maxey and McCain. And he got rid of Ben Simmons. He got a future basketball Hall of Famer in exchange for a guy that, frankly, has turned out to be one of the most disappointing first-round picks of all, number of all picks of all time. So he hasn't done everything wrong. It's just there's a handful of situations like signing this whole Eric Gordon situation, right? Or the PJ Tucker stuff, or James Harden didn't work the way you wanted to.
Yeah, he has a lot of loyalties to some of these older guys that he had relationships with, and who knows how much of that is James Harden saying, hey, I want my guys here, much like Aaron Rodgers. I want my guys here. Right. I want to feel comfortable. I want guys that I want to play with. And that's a detriment. He
caters to the star players.
Yeah, that's a detriment, that he listens to those guys and gives them a voice sometimes. You want to be able to
separate.
Well, I was going to say, you want to be able to let them guys have a voice and say, hey, these are some of the things that I'm interested in. But you can't cave into all of them. And I think he, you know, this team went from, you know, in the early process years, you had a young Joel Embiid and a young Ben Simmons flanked by J.J. Redick, and then you had the Ilyasova and Bellinelli. You had a couple of shooters around them that were like in there, you know, that were veteran players. So you had the two young guys with some veteran players around them, and they were fun and up and down, and they win that playoff series. And then I think the expectations got too high that, they should beat Boston. And quite frankly, I don't think they were really ready to beat Boston, so they lose that series. Well, then the next year they come back, and you're hoping that that team that won 52 games in 2018 would be better the next season. And, you know, quite frankly, what year was that? The next season afterwards, the 1 year in 2017, 2018, they won 52 games. Well, then the next year, they messed the draft up. You know, that's the year they take Bridges in the draft and trade him, and they get Zaire Smith and all. They still won 51 games, and that's the year that they made all the trades. They ended up getting Butler, they got Harris, and they lose to the Raptors. So even though they didn't win as many games during the regular season, they go 7 games. So now there's 2 years in a row where you're like, man, okay, so they lost to Boston. Then the next year, you lose at the buzzer on the quadruple doink thing there to the Raptors. And then progressively, you start to slide back a little bit. And you just have not been able to find the right mix because of so many different mistakes. And I don't even know how you got to this point. I just don't know how you got to a point where the team was young and fun to now old, broken down with no assets.
Well, you
had
said it,
all
that-
those assets before were so misused.
Well, you said it before, Mike. You said the Daryl Morey's loyalty to some of these older guys has put them in a very awkward situation right now.
The mismanagement of the assets just depresses me.
Well, the mismanagement started with Colangelo.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, but the amount of stuff that Hinkie built for them to allow someone to mismanage that, it's nauseating what they had. They really could be in the Oklahoma City situation. They had as much ammunition as like Oklahoma City has more than everyone combined.
No, but you can point to a lot of situations. You can point to the Houston Rockets right now, the Minnesota Timberwolves. There's a
lot of teams that have lost for 3-4 seasons that are now turning it around based on all of the draft choices that they have stockpiled, and those guys are starting to now become
Cleveland Cavaliers.
veteran players. Detroit's been bad for 10 years.
I was going to say Detroit's been bad forever.
And now they're kind of in the middle of the pack because they got a lot of young players. They're not ready to contend, but that's a team that will fight you in the first round and be a pain in your butt.
The only team that's really been horrible at rebuilding is the Washington Wizards.
Awful. They got to be the worst franchise in professional sports, the Wizards.
They're at least in the conversation.
They are, to me, top 5 worst, if not the worst. I don't remember the Wizards winning a playoff series in my life. If they have, I'm not saying they haven't. I'm just saying I don't remember once where
it wasn't memorable. You're saying.
I don't know that they've ever gotten out of the first round.
I'm sure they have, but no one remembers it.
We'll check it on the Phils and the Yanks. They're down in Clearwater today.
Baseball? What?
Yeah, man. Beautiful day here. We could be playing baseball down the shore. Sports Bass Live, 97.3 ESPN. All right, 352. These are some of the teams I jotted down real quick as worst organizations in sports. The Wizards are definitely on the list.
100%.
Browns,
Yep.
Lions.
Yeah, I mean, they had very long, sustained periods of horribleness.
They've never been good in my life. What are you talking about? They haven't won a playoff game in like 50 years until this year. Last year.
Last year.
Yeah, that to me says you're pretty horrible. Right? It
Yes,
can't go off the fact that they're good now. They haven't been good in your life.
They went 30 years without winning a playoff game.
The Nets,
Oh, yeah.
the Kings, the Sacramento Kings.
Sacramento Kings, right.
They had one little run
One little cute run.
in the 90s.
Late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah, Weber. They had the little
Divots.
run TMC teams with Mitch Richmond.
We're thinking of the Warriors now.
Oh, yeah. Jeez. Was it who played? Didn't he play for the Kings, Mitch Richmond, at one point?
He did. He played for both of
I
them.
was going to say he did play for the Kings. But, yeah, I was thinking of the Warriors. But the Kings teams, the Kings organization, the Hornets, every incarnation, Charlotte and have never been good.
The Bobcats.
I don't know that the Charlotte Hornets have ever won a play. I don't remember them. They
won
had
a
like that
playoff
little Larry
series,
Johnson
yeah.
morning.
Jamal Mashburn.
They had a little like Larry Johnson, Jamal. I don't remember Mashburn being there. I remember
Mashburn was a Hornet.
I don't remember that, and if he was, I don't remember him being good. I remember Morning and Larry Johnson, Del Curry. I do not remember Jamal Mashburn.
Later, it was Jamal Mashburn and Vlade Divac and P.J. Brown.
The Hawks
Atlanta Hawks
have never been to a finals that I can recall in my lifetime. I don't remember them. They were the 1 seed 1 year with Al Horford, and nobody believed in them. The New York Jets.
Ooh, yeah.
Are on my list. Worst organizations. The Chicago White Sox. They did win a World Series
in 2005.
Recently, 20 years ago now. Other than that, they've always been horrible. There's some teams that had good past that haven't been good recently, like
Oakland
the Tigers. Oakland's been good, though. They've been playoff teams. They just were really bad recently here. Keep them coming. Worst organizations in sports, 609-403-0973. Football at 4. That was Adam Schefter this morning talking a little bit about the NFL draft and what is coming up. It's Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Jeff Mosher is here, as you just heard what Adam Schefter said. Player 10 and player 35. Not a lot of difference there, Jeff, and as we know, the Eagles will draft at number 32. We're getting way ahead of ourselves with the draft process, but I guess that's good news for Philadelphia, and we talk about quarterbacks all the time. You want more quarterbacks taken when you have one. Not as many quarterbacks projected, right? 2, maybe 3, a possible 4th right now. But you want that talent to kind of slide towards the back here. But I don't want to get too far into the draft. But if you were to project right now, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, defensive tackle, edge rusher, maybe a corner. But is it likely that they use that pick to try to add talent to this roster in terms of an established player?
Remains to be seen. Remains to be seen how he has used first-round picks in the past. Obviously, like the A.J. Brown pick was a first-round pick, mid-first-round pick to trade. Jason Peters was once, I believe, a little bit of a mid to late first-round pick. When you're at 32, I don't know if we talked about this the other day. I know I spoke about it with Adam a little bit on the podcast. That becomes somewhat fertile territory for teams that want to jump into the first round. They may have picked it already, or maybe they didn't have a first-round pick, and they want the fifth-year option. That's where 32 sometimes can help you more than, say, 28 or 29, right? Because you're just looking to get that last pick in the first round. You don't want to move up too much if you're picking in the second round there. So you try to deal for 32 to get a fifth-year option. But like you mentioned, usually you do that for a quarterback. Last year, the Panthers did it for a wide receiver, Xavier Legette, which is very interesting and you don't see happen. So the one thing to keep in mind, Mike, and I'm sure you've already talked about it, is that the Eagles almost never pick where they're slotted to pick. But this one's a little bit different. This one, you're at 32. You only have 7 total picks in the draft. You had an extra third rounder at one point, but you traded in for Jahan Dotson. So your maneuverability to move up or, let's say to move up, to your point, or to, trade away that pick for a player, doesn't give you that much to play with in the draft. And Howie definitely made it sound like he'd like to use this draft to continue to replenish.
Yeah, when they looked at their roster at the end of 2023, Jeff, and they were 10-1, what was it about that roster makeup or on that roster that they felt was not sustainable? I mean, because they were 10. That year is still kind of crazy that they were 10-1. They won games at Kansas City. They beat Buffalo. I mean, they had some big wins with that team. But what do you think they looked at and said, we got to change the way we're doing some things?
Yeah, there were 2 things they clearly looked at and felt that they could make a change and did. One was age on defense. They were old, and it showed last year on defense. Very not just old, but really undynamic and slow. With Kevin Byard at safety, who they traded for after the Terrell Edmonds experiment did not work out well. After the kid they signed, whose name Justin Evans was it? The guy who had
he was one of them.
3 straight years of injuries, right? I mean, he was playing okay. That's why he was the opening day safety, or week 1 safety. But he was, breaking down and had broke down before, and he got hurt. They were old at nickel with Maddox and then Bradley Roby. They were aging or just undynamic at linebacker with Nick Morrow and with Zach Cunningham. And I think at one point they brought in Miles Jack, if I'm not mistaken, in training camp.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
So that was, yeah. And then, of course, you had the Hassan Reddick situation where I wouldn't quite call him aging, but for a pass rusher, he was getting closer to 30, and they had not played well, and they felt that, there were guys up front playing selfishly, and he was among the leaders of that. So you saw how they felt that they needed to move on from him, and they traded him to the Jets. So that was one thing. In the defense specifically, they were undynamic, unathletic, and aging there. Oh, I forgot to even mention James Bradbury. And then the second thing for the offense, which was generally intact, I do felt do believe that their actions showed that they felt that getting Saquon, and again, they were able to get him because of the market for running backs, but adding him to that offense would allow them to become more focused on running the ball and not having to ask Jalen Hurts to throw the ball 35, 40 times a game. You remember the issue last year offensively was that there were a big number of turnovers that you hadn't seen in years past when they were more of a run-oriented team. So they went back to becoming a run-oriented team with arguably the best running back in the NFL.
Yeah, and you look back at you talk about age, that team. That's where the Zach Bond thing comes in. They do get Bond, they bring him in. But do you think Howie looks at age and that 2023 team, and does that, it used to be the standard for the Eagles, right, Jeff? You're 30 years old, we got to move on from you. Does Bond fall into that category?
I don't think so. They're not against players of a certain age as long as you show that you can play at that high level. Darius Slay has been on the team, and Jason Peters, who just announced his retirement, played into his 40s, and the Eagles kept bringing him back willfully because they knew how good of an athlete he was. And so they've relaxed on that 30-year-old thing, and that helped them win their first championship in 2017. They had guys like Patrick Robinson and Chris Long. I forget how old LeGarrette Blount was at that point, but he had a pretty decent amount of mileage on him for a running back. There are some, we mentioned Jason Peters. So, they're fine. Like, look, Lane Johnson's going to come back and play because he plays at a high level. Jason Kelsey, Fletcher Cox. They're not sort of against bringing you back north of 30 the way they were in the 2000s, when Joe Banner was. I think a lot of the advances in sports science has helped that. I mean, you're seeing quarterbacks now playing into their 40s, but there's a difference between still playing at a high level and being undynamic, unathletic, and having your age show. And that's where last year's team, you really got to see that up front.
Well, as we kind of discussed, Jeff Mosher's here for Football at 4. They had picked 32. We talk about free agency. The areas where, like, if they were to sign, be a player in free agency, Jeff, is there a position where you would think that's what they want to target in free agency? Because I don't know where you look across this roster and see where you need to make a big free agent splash.
No, I can't imagine they're going to make a big free agent splash, because if they were, they would just re-sign their own players who are, generally young and good, like Milton Williams and Mekhi Becton and Zach Bond. So, but what the Eagles do pretty well is, and they've been a little hit or miss. I mean, we mentioned Terrell Evans, and there have been a couple of one-year veteran signings that have not worked out for them in the past. But they are pretty good in general about signing a veteran to a 1 or a 2-year deal to become a depth piece. So with where they are at edge right now, where they are on the interior, probably going to lose Milton Williams. It wouldn't surprise me if they tried to sign a little bit of 1-year veteran depth there. Even running back, if they lose Gainwell, do they really go to Will Shipley as RB2 next year, knowing that Shipley's got to get a little bigger and stronger because, Gainwell, we don't talk about it a lot. He's pretty good in pass pro. And he was their kind of 2-minute and 4-minute back at the end of the halves, even with Saquon Barkley. So you're going to still need that element of your offense, and you can find that in free agency.
I guess one area, let's get some takes from Jeff Mosher here. I want to get your thoughts on Goddard in the tight end spot and how that might materialize this offseason.
Well, he's going into a year where he has no guaranteed money left on his deal, and it's the last year of his deal. And typically a player of his caliber wants security. They want multi-year deal. Well, they want more guaranteed money. They want guaranteed money. They want to know that they won't be cut tomorrow.
Which is why Matthew Stafford's name has come up in trades. He's out of, he has a contract for 2 more years, but he has no more guaranteed money left. So the Rams are saying, yeah, we want you, but he's saying, I want more money. So now he becomes available, and Goddard's in a similar boat.
Right, and Matt doesn't want to be year to year with the Rams. He'd like to know if he's going to finish his career. Maybe it's the next 2 to 3 years, and he doesn't have to worry that if he gets hurt or there's a down year for the Rams, that he's now looking for a new team and some kind of money 2 years later, coming off not maybe a great year, right? And so that veterans are usually in that boat. They just want to be able to have that security and not be searching for the next contract in the event that maybe they do get hurt or have maybe not a great year or something uncontrollable around them, especially for a guy like Goddard. Let's say the quarterback gets hurt and the backup comes in and he's not as good and you don't get as many targets. You don't want that stuff impacting your future paycheck. So again, we haven't heard anything yet from Goddard's camp, but that's usually the case. But for the Eagles, they can look at it and say, all right, well, you might want more security, some guaranteed money, but you also just played 10 games last year. You've had a history of getting hurt, and we don't want to give you that. And sometimes that leads to team telling player, why don't you go seek permission for a trade, see what you can get, see if there's a team that's willing to give you a second year where the guaranteed money is in year 2, so you have that security. If so, then we'll try to work out a deal. If not, then you can come back to us and we'll maybe work out something that works for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, this is a clear spot where they probably will look to draft, wouldn't you think? Or is free agency that spot where they, I don't know what they think of Grant Calcaterra, do they look at him as the next, he's a good pass-catching tight end, but do they look at him as elevated to number 1 and then depth behind him, or do they want to get a new number 1 guy potentially?
They're going to have to get somebody who can block better than Grant Calcaterra, especially if they want to continue to give the ball to Saquon Barkley and make that a focal point of their offense. Calcaterra has been a very good story, a 6th-round pick, probably should have gone higher, had the concussion issues at Oklahoma, had a nice last year at SMU, gets drafted. You can see he's a really nice player, especially against zone defenses, to find the voids in those zones, catch the ball, turn upfield. Good player in that regard. Good pass catcher. He's a willing blocker. And I know that sounds like sort of damning someone with faint praise. I mean, he's not a great blocker, but there are times on tape you see guys who are just unwilling to use their body to block. And that's a fair assessment to say someone's at least a willing and capable blocker, which Calcaterra has tried his hardest to be. But again, when you're running the ball as much as the Eagles are and you need that extra beef on the line, there's just too many times where he's not executing the block that he's asked to do. And so if the Eagles really the beauty of Dallas Goedert is he is that guy plus what Grant Calcaterra gives and more in the pass game. It's hard to find those guys. So it's hard to find them on free agent market too. So if they're going to replace Dallas Goedert, it's most likely going to be the way they've continued to do it, which is through the draft, going from Brent Selleck to Zach Ertz to Dallas Goedert himself. So yeah. I imagine the Eagles are going to look at their past success and say, we know how to do this at that position and try it again.
Yeah, and this is a good draft if you want a tight end. So watch the combine this weekend, find your guy. As for free agency in the draft, Ertz is in free agency. He's probably the most accomplished guy. Mike Gesicki's a good receiving tight end. Gerald Everett, Conklin from the Jets. So you don't have a premier kind of guy. I don't know if there's a blocker that you just say, hey, we'll bring in the blocker and pair him up with Calcaterra. But that will be one guy, Jeff, right, to keep an eye on is Goddard.
Yeah, absolutely a guy to keep an eye on because you just don't know, and I'm sure once everybody gets back from Indianapolis and all the early conversations happen, then that's usually when you start to hear word on what's going to happen with someone like him.
Right. Now, you look at the 2 free agents from Philadelphia. Milton Williams, he is ranked by many publications as the number 2 interior defensive lineman, and Josh Sweat is number 1 from most sides. So, you are pretty much looking at the 2 guys who are going to be sought after the most. But, Jeff, that is an area where the Eagles don't mind drafting and have drafted a lot as well, much like the tight end spot. So free agency, probably not where they would go to replenish those 2 areas either. Probably more likely that they replenish those areas in the draft, correct?
Well, it depends on what – I do think the Eagles are the type of team that would look at free agency to add depth, 1 or 2 year veteran, whether it's on the edges or whether it's up front. I mean, we can go from Chris Long to Malik Jackson to who's that great Ravens nose tackle who's suddenly escaping me? Why can't I remember his name?
The
Haloti.
Yeah, I was going to say Haloti Ngata.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Now, some of these guys, I'm mentioning names, they didn't work out, but it's really, because sometimes these guys get hurt. They're not – you're looking for someone who can give you some time, give you some snaps, but not is your building block piece. You want to start, obviously, Jalen Carter. You want to see if Moro Ojomo can be your starter. If not, because it doesn't seem like Jordan Davis is going to be a 3 technique anytime. So, but he'll still be a part of the rotation. But you would like to have a veteran there, a veteran on the edges, especially if Brandon Graham retires, to give you some snaps. So the Eagles have always done that. They've always had that kind of player. But again, that might be different than a conversation you and I are having about replenishing. There's replenishing for the future, and then there's replenishing for we still want to be competitive and win a Super Bowl this year. So we need to grab a couple of veterans to be able to take up snaps that know how to play, can be good leaders, could be good winners. You know, Patrick Robinson, 2017, right? Remember they signed him, thought he was going to be an outside corner, moved him to the slot, and then he went, bat crazy as a slot corner and played really well there and helped them win a championship.
Which is, that's why I had this guy written down to talk to you about, because in that mold, a lot of number 1 picks, guys who just faltered somewhere, had some injury problems. Chase Young is a free agent, and he seems like that kind of guy that, like, the Eagles would take a flyer on. Hey, he was a first-round pick. He's had some injury issues. He's bounced all around. We'll give you the 1-year prove-it deal.
Yes, if he is a good example of someone, if Chase Young can only find a 1-year prove-it deal,
right,
that would,
Yeah, like if they.
By the way, that's kind of what Zach Bond was signed for, right? And Devin White. These are examples. I know I'm mentioning a lot of names that have not worked out, like Nada and Malik Jackson and Devin White and Terrell Edmonds, but it doesn't mean the process itself is flawed. I think that there were some scouting issues at that time and some fit issues you could certainly question, especially Terrell Edmonds, who played a box sort of linebacker safety position for the Steelers, and then you sign him to be in a Fangio too high type structure defense a couple of years ago with Desai. That to me never made sense, but the whole idea of trying to get value in 1-year deals from veterans generally works for teams.
Yeah, and, Philly's done that a lot, as you kind of chronicled. They will take these guys who at one point had a lot of skill and were highly thought of, and for whatever reason, injuries generally related, they've kind of are into a spot where they have to take a cheaper deal. As you said, if Chase Young gets a 3-year deal somewhere, okay, fine. But if, hey, you want to come here for 1 year, prove it, we'll take a crack at you. And those are the kind of guys that they've really prospered from, right? When they get a guy who has no place else to go.
Right. And then Mekhi Becton, really good example. Maybe not the veteran as far as 28, 29, 30, but a guy who was looking for a home, needed a 1-year deal. The Eagles had a plan for him that was certainly better than, say, what their plan for Terrell Edmonds was. I feel like I'm picking on them now. I don't mean to be. That one just jumps out to me. But they had a plan for Mekhi Becton, kind of like they had a plan for Torrey Smith when they acquired him in 2017 to be that one real true legit like field stretcher where they already had Zach Ertz for the intermediary. They had Alshon Jeffrey who can give you these spurts of big plays, and Torrey Smith didn't have to be a high volume pass catcher, but he fit in really nicely with what they were doing and helped them win a Super Bowl.
And he was a really good interview at the Super Bowl. You can check that out on our YouTube channel from the Super Bowl week. Jeff Mosher, let's finish off with this. Usually Andrew's on today, so let's go through his mock draft, because D tackle in round 1, edge in round 2, tight end in round 3, guard in round 4. He has a running back, and it sounds like he is filling all of the needs that we're talking about where the Eagles like to draft, hitting in the comfort zone, interior defensive line, edge rusher, and a tight end.
Yeah, this is what I love about Andrew's drafts every year is that they're really well thought out. They're not clickbaity. They're not. They're consistent with – some people do mock drafts with, like, who I want the Eagles to get, and Andrew does it with who he thinks the Eagles will get based on their philosophies and their draft history, and I think he nailed this. I mean, of course, it doesn't matter if the players wind up being Eagles, but the concepts, right? I think he had 4 guys up front in the first 7 picks. He had an edge rusher. He had obviously the D tackle in the first round. He had an offensive lineman, I believe, in the 4th round. So he had a tight end in the 3rd or 4th. So that makes a lot of sense for what the Eagles need and are likely to do based on their history.
It's a very Eagles draft. You're right. By the way, they have 1, 2, 3 5th round picks. So in the 5th round, he went running back to probably replace Gainwell, linebacker. because, obviously did Dean say on a podcast that his kneecap went up into his thigh? Did you see that?
I saw that. That was really disturbing.
Yes.
I mean, like really, the grossest things I've seen are like the biceps injuries where you can kind of see the tendon moving around in the arm and maybe even the triceps one. But when he said that about the knee, well, obviously the grossest ones are like the compound fractures where like a leg bends in a half, right? Or like a 90-degree angle. Those are tough too. But for some reason, it's the ligament ones that really like creep me out when you hear about them kind of moving into different areas of the body. That makes me squeamish.
He's Jeff Mosher, the Inside the Birds podcast. They're going to be covering the draft and, of course, the combine. Adam is out there. We'll talk to Adam tomorrow. Free agency begins on March the 10th. We're going to be previewing it and getting you ready for it on Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Jeff Mosher, thank you, buddy.
You got it, Mike. Take care.
All right, there's Mosh here on a Sports Bash Football at 4. And, of course, Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365. The one thing, somebody texted in, I just saw it now, I should have asked Mosh why he was here, said Mike Hargrave coming off injury, get him on the cheap, 1-year deal. Javon Hargrave, 32 years old. Is that the kind of guy, like if you lose Milton Williams, you bring Hargrave in, see if he takes a 1-year prove-it deal, and you get one more, like, flash year out of him? 32 is a real tough age coming off of an injury. Not a bad name, though. Good one to throw out. We'll put that down on the list, and maybe ask Adam about it tomorrow. We'll have plenty on Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash, the Combine all weekend long. Updates there. Coming up, we'll update you on all the key stories when Nick Earnshaw joins us for another edition of Nick's Nuggets here on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Sea Isle. And, of course, you can watch the show, live video of the show streaming on the X platform and on YouTube at Mike Gill Show. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can watch the show there. And if you missed any of the show, you can always go back and just watch it over. Easy to do. Go to YouTube, Mike Gill Show, subscribe, watch. We're back with the Nuggets next on the Sports Bash. 429 Sports Bash 97 ESPN. Live video on the X platform, YouTube at Mike Gill Show. Subscribe, watch the show. You can see Nick Earnshaw, good-looking dude. He's about to join us for another edition of Nick's Nuggets here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. This hour is brought to you by Broadlee's Plumbing, Heating, Air Conditioning, your trusted source for heating, plumbing, service, installation. Call 609-390-3907. Online, broadlees.net. Nick Earnshaw is host of the Shift podcast. He is the producer of The Locker Room weekends on 97.3 ESPN with Billy Schweim, and he's the host right now of today's edition of Nick's Nuggets. What's up, Nick Earnshaw? How are you, buddy?
How's it going, Mike? Nice to talk to you once again. We're gonna get a little, I guess, negative in a little bit because I got to answer your poll question for the first nugget. I mean, the process question. I didn't expect to wake up to that one today, and I know that's a Mike Gill thought right there.
The gap is closing, by the way. It's 55-44 all of a sudden. I think
wow.
all the processors were working. The anti-processors maybe were out of work.
Yeah, I think the anti-processors probably had something to do, and that's where we're going to start. And I would do the process over again. The problem is the process was not executed properly. It wasn't done right. There were so many mistakes made. The idea of the process, right? Collect all of these draft picks, collect all of these assets, and turn them into either draft picks and stars where you go through the draft and get players that way, or utilize those picks and assets and turn them into superstars and make trades to go get other players to build the team. I love the idea of the process. The problem is the Sixers are the Sixers, and they can't stop stepping on their own toes. So that's why it didn't really seem to work out that much. I mean, the idea of it did, but all the other stuff, the execution of it to win a championship, to become a contender, I mean, there were so many problems with it. So the Thunder, I feel like, have had the best success with that type of model. This model has been copycat in all types of leagues, even Major League Baseball. The Astros did it around the same time the Sixers did it. So you've seen this in professional sports plenty of times. I would 100% do the process over again. I would do it in multiple sports. Maybe not football. Football's a little different, but baseball, basketball, absolutely I'm doing the process over.
Well, yeah, I mean, I look at it like this. If you're a Sixer fan and you were not a fan of the process, if they landed the players they should have gotten or had the opportunity to get, you would have changed your mind. I mean, if they had on the team, we gave one example of where a guy – see, this is where when you pick higher, more players are available to you. When you pick lower, those players aren't on the board. So, for instance, the Sixers drafted Michael Carter-Williams, and he was pick number 10. At 15, let's just say they ended up picking Giannis Antetokounmpo instead. Something tells me you would probably like that pick and say that was a great pick. And then, who knows what happens after that. If you have Giannis, now, the next year, you're in a situation, down the line, all these opportunities of different players that they had the opportunity to take that they did not. We've given out numerous things. So I would sign up to take the chance to get the right guy this time, that somebody in charge would get the right guy. Now, that's not guaranteed either, but it's definitely better than the alternative, which is a season like this or a season of mediocrity. Like, if they were in the play-in right now, nobody would care. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so you have to take the opportunity to get stars again. They just failed at finding those stars the first time. But the stars were available to them.
Yes. Listen, they whiffed on draft picks. They had unforeseen circumstances happen with Ben Simmons. I mean, that guy was a first overall pick. He just went off the rails after that Atlanta series, and, the whole debacle there. He's now with the Clippers. Markelle Fultz, he had the injury. He forgot how to shoot, forgot how to play basketball. I mean, they got very unlucky with some of their picks. They were in the perfect position to take really good players and build a really good team because they also acquired all of those assets. They turned some of those assets into a Tobias Harris, into a Jimmy Butler. They did everything they were supposed to do for the most part, It just didn't work. And then things went wrong. Things went awry. They got unlucky. They had the NBA step in the beginning of it with Adam Silver putting Jerry Colangelo in. I mean, it just turned out to be a nightmare. Then the GM has Brian Colangelo, Jerry's son, has all the burner accounts, the wife, the whole thing. I mean, it's a big nightmare. I mean, they're just the Sixers. That's the problem. They're the Sixers. And what can go wrong will go wrong. As Stephen A. talks about the Cowboys, it applies to the 76ers too, because everything that can go wrong with this franchise, it does. And I would do the process over, because the idea of the process is to accumulate as many assets as you possibly can, whether you use them through the draft and build players that way, as well as turning him into stars, like going after a Jimmy Butler and turning him to big role players in Tobias Harris. They did everything that was supposed to be done for the most part when Elton Brand took the reins over from Colangelo. So it was not put together well after Hinkie years. It kind of just turned into limbo. You got unlucky with some of those draft picks, and Okafor and Noel didn't pan out. Ben Simmons didn't pan out. Markelle Fultz didn't pan out. So you had guys that just didn't pan out. And, you look at the Thunder, they've had guys pan out, and it's worked out for them.
All of them.
It's worked out for them. So
all of their guys are seemingly have panned out. They have too many good players on that team.
Trade them.
I don't know what they're going to do with the amount of first-round picks they still have. I mean, seriously, what do they have, like 9 first-round picks?
Maybe they can trade for Paul George or Joel Embiid. Who knows?
I think they already had Paul George. How'd that work out for Oklahoma City?
They could try it again.
The biggest, the Colangelo hire, to me, I said that was the downfall of everything. He didn't do one thing good. He hated Hinkie. He hated the whole thought of the process and wanted to do everything the exact opposite to try to get separated from that. The malpractice of what he did with the assets, the amount of first-round picks and all of the picks that they had, and how he so cavalierly just started trading them away because he did not want it to be associated with Hinkie. So he wanted to try to get rid of everything that Hinkie gave him, and he absolutely ruined this thing to where they had to start then. They basically tried to take a shortcut after him.
Yep.
Let's trade for Harris. Let's trade for Butler. Okay, that didn't work. Let's trade for Horford. Let's do – and then it became just start trading for veteran players and older guys. And you went from this young, fun, exciting team with a lot of draft choices to an older-based team because you started to add veterans through trades and free agency, and now you're in no man's land yet again.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of reverted back to where you started with the whole idea with the process, right? I wish they were able to see it through and go through with how the process should have been done. I mean, you look at the Houston Astros, they built through the draft, they had all these young players, and they won multiple World Series, right? I know the cheating scandal, et cetera. That's not the idea here. Building through the draft with assets, with draft picks, right? Starting from scratch. In the NBA, there is nothing worse than where the Sixers are now, and that is purgatory. You don't want to be the bottom of the barrel, 7, 8, even 6, 9, 10 seeds in the East or the West. You don't want to be there. That is purgatory. That's Orlando Magic for many, many years spot. You don't want to be there. That's not where you want to be in the NBA. You want to have stars. It's a star-driven league. The best way to do that, develop them through the draft or use those assets to trade for one. And, unfortunately, the Sixers have just had so many issues with their front office. I mean, that has changed over. Head coaches, they haven't had the same roster any single year. They've been, because of all the turnover in the front office, as well as at the head coach, they've just traded everybody, have signed new players, have different rosters every year. Unlike the Nuggets, who are a team that played cohesive, were together for a long time, as well as the Milwaukee Bucks. The Sixers were trying to do that, but then because the NBA stepped in, the Cole Colangelo situation, it just went awry.
Can't disagree with much of that. And it's unfortunate because they're still stuck in this spot because you can't get rid of Embiid. I don't know what you're going to do with George. So your best plan is to put your hands together and hope that those guys are healthy at the start of next season and they make it through another year.
Another year of hope, and hopefully that they can be healthy. I don't even know. I don't even know what to do with that team anymore. I can't watch it. I just can't. I tried tuning in for a little bit last night, Mike, and I tune in. Jalen Brunson hits a big shot, and the game's essentially over. So I was out in the fourth quarter. I was like, let me tune in. It's a close game. Got the update on my phone. It's in a bad situation. And Paul George, go back to the podcast. I mean, just go back. Start posting clips again. All right.
5 nights a week podcast.
5 nights. I'll do 7. I'll go with him. All right. I'll go do his podcast with him at this point because it's brutal. All right. Moving along. Nugget number 2. I don't know if you saw the news or saw another player podcast, the Kelsey's podcast. Travis Kelce reported on Pat McAfee today that he will be coming back for another year. But on his last episode of his podcast with his brother Jason, New Heights, he talked about listening to Taylor Swift because he has been so upset and so distraught since that loss to the Eagles. A guy who's a multi-time Super Bowl champion, Mike. I mean, I thought Travis was a little over the top with what he was talking about on that New Heights podcast about listening to the Taylor Swift, and he's been down in the dumps since that Super Bowl. I mean, the guy's won multiple times. I get being upset, but I thought he was a little over the top with that. Mike, your reaction?
I don't know that I actually believe him. I think he's just
I don't think I
with
do
his
either.
brother. Yeah, I mean, and I think he's just shooting the breeze with his brother, and basically just trying to be funny. I didn't hear it. I don't know what he said, but I know they say, "Hey, I was so depressed. I'm listening to Taylor Swift." To me, that just sounds like he's trying to be funny.
Yeah, and he's going on and on like she's got a song for everything, blah blah blah. I mean, it can't be that down in the dumps. I think he's just trying to promote his girlfriend there a little bit, trying to get a laugh from his brother and from the audience. And I think it fell flat. But he is going to come back next year, and I don't think the Super Bowl loss is going to affect him that much.
Did you hear? I read something that apparently he said he was really sick before the game or something. Was that something?
I didn't see that part of it, but I don't know. I mean, he's talked about it. I saw the clip where he was talking about that he just didn't love his performance in that game. Like he was just mortified of his performance in that game. So
I guess
now
Josh is saying
that he's sick.
Josh is saying that the GM came out and said that there was an illness and he was really sick. Now the Sixers, you remember, we were at the Super Bowl. There was a lot of people saying that the flu was going through the Sixers as well.
Or the Eagles. Yeah, it was going through the Eagles.
Sorry.
And, I don't know. I don't know how much I believe that. I don't think Kelsey's the type of guy who's going to make an excuse for if he didn't feel good before the game. I mean, they all play horrible. Pat Mahomes didn't play well either. Now we're just going to blame it on being sick. The Eagles were sick too during the week, so you can't blame it on that. The GM, I think it's a little far-fetched.
Yeah, I had heard that like recently. I didn't hear it the week of the you would have thought that would have been you would have thought that would have been reported during the week that there was an illness going through the Chiefs' practice at the locker room or something like you did with the Eagles.
Yeah, because it was like being reported for the Eagles.
Yeah, here it is. Tom Pelissero tweeted this out 2 days ago. He said, Brett Veach told me Travis Kelce was, quote, battling with a pretty big illness before the Super Bowl, but the team doesn't believe that the loss to the Eagles will be Kelce's last game. I think Travis is excited to come back. So that was the tweet of Veach on the Insider show on NFL Network saying that he was battling with a pretty big illness.
Yeah, well, he didn't play very well, and he didn't really. I don't think he talked about it on his podcast. I didn't see. If I'm gonna go back and see if he did at some point, but yeah, Kelce, he will be back.
I'll leave the players podcast to you guys. I'm out.
All right, you're out. You're not even gonna try one. Not even one.
No,
there's not one that excites you out there.
No.
All right. I'll find you one, and I'm gonna make you listen to one. All right. Let's move on to nugget number 3. And I want to talk about the Philadelphia Phillies a little bit before we get out of here. And it's something that I think's an interesting dynamic heading into next year and into the postseason for the Phillies, right? So last year was the first year the Phillies won the division since 2011. And the previous 2 years, they went into the wild card spot and got to the World Series and got to an NLCS. Last year, they win the division, they get to the division series, and they lose. Mike, for the Phillies, where is an ideal division placement for them? Do we want to just go win the division, or because of that wild card thing and what's been going on over in recent years with teams, getting hot, being able to play through that wild card spot and move on into the playoffs? Do we want the Phillies to really actually be a wild card team instead of win the division? I feel like that's a little weird. You want them to win as many games as possible, but I mean, the wild card thing, it's an interesting dynamic with that wild card spot and the division.
It's a fair question, and last year I did have a lot, but all the other teams that won their divisions, the Dodgers, they ended up winning the World Series. The Yankees, they went on. So no, you can't use this crutch of, hey, we got to play this wild card. Now, me personally, I would prefer to play, but if you're the best team, you're the best team, right? And the Phillies, as I said all season, and I told you last year, they were not the best team. They were not going to win the World Series, and that played out. They were not the best team because they are the same as they are this year. Too streaky. Their lineup has too many outs in it. Too many guys who get themselves out. Last year, they had a big problem in the bullpen in the playoffs that they did not have during the regular season. So they got to fix a lot. And I don't know if that's winning the division, finishing second, or the third wild card that's going to fix any of this. They've got to find more consistency in the lineup before I can take them serious. Now, can they win the World Series? Same as I said last year. Yes, they can. If they're scorching hot at the right time, they're as talented and as good as anybody. But I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's why I don't – the changing the lineup thing is just not, I think, enough at all.
See the lineup today? You see the lineup today?
No, I did not see the lineup today.
You had a little fun lineup today. You had Schwarber leading off today.
Oh, Schwarber led off today. How about that?
Yeah, today's lineup.
A busy day, say the least.
Schwarber, Castellanos, Marsh, Sosa, Clemens, Stubbs, Rojas, Arroyo, Castro. But Schwarber got the leadoff nod today. Now, I'm imagining it's because they wanted to get him a couple of at-bats real quick and then get him out. He did play first base today, though. That's
interesting. Having Schwarber over at first base. I mean, they've been trying to get Schwarber out of the field for years, and that was kind of the whole point. But maybe with Bryce being out, it seems like he's going to be okay, I think. You need someone to play
he was
first.
okay.
Yeah,
they said he was okay. Look, I think you're going to see days where they want to get Harper off his feet, so they want someone else to play first base, and I guess a way to do that is to put Schwarber there. I guess I don't know why they just don't look at JT Realmuto to get him out from behind the plate more and put him at first base, but whatever. So Schwarber played first today. He hit leadoff. They tied 7-7.
Yeah, you and I talked about that before. I mean, we've talked about that for a long, long time with JT. Like, JT Realmuto should have been playing first base a couple of years ago, at least here and there, a couple of games, whatever, just to get him out from behind the plate, but keep him in the lineup. And I think it would have helped him. I think it would have kept him maybe a little healthier. He has the knee surgery last year. I think that's something to watch for. But going back to the original nugget and, the division, the wild card, it doesn't matter to me. If they can get into the postseason, listen, they were the only team last year, that first game of the division round, to lose that first game. Every other team that won the division won game one of the NLDS or ALDS. They didn't. I mean, they just fell apart. And if they go cold all at the same time, it's the weirdest phenomenon I've ever seen. They all go cold in the postseason, all at the same time. It's crazy. Then they're not going to go anywhere. And, they have too many, like you said, boom or bust guys at this point. They don't have enough guys that can hit for contact and be consistent. And if they all go cold at the same time, they're going nowhere. And the fact the bullpen fell apart last year, that was something no one really saw coming because of how good they were all year.
Well, I'll give you some numbers from today that were encouraging, all right? Wheeler, 2 innings, 4 strikeouts. Strom, 1 inning, 2 strikeouts. Now, he did give up a hit and 2 runs. Alvarado, 1 inning, 2 strikeouts. Romano, 1 inning, 2 strikeouts. That was a positive. Kerkering came in, threw an inning, and had a strikeout. And McMillan, he's a guy that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. He had 1 inning and 2 strikeouts as well. So a lot of guys coming in, getting some strikeouts. Key guys, too. Romano, Alvarado. Those are things I want to see. Can you, in spring training here, are you efficient? 1 inning of work, 2 strikeouts, get me out of the game. Boom. There we go.
I'm encouraged. Listen, I'm encouraged, but it is also February 27th. There's a lot of baseball to be played.
Hey, listen.
I feel like they'll be fine during the regular season. That's not the worry. I think they'll win 90 games. But, after that, it's like, all right, y'all going to go cold again?
Hey, listen. It's sad what sports has become. We're like, I can't take anything I saw during the regular season and get like anything from it. So all these regular seasons just become just a waste of our time.
I know. Well, you and I, we love the regular season because we love sports. But for some fans out there, they just want to see the postseason. They want to see the postseason.
Well, you just said, though, I know they're going to win 90 games, but what am I going to do with that? Like, enjoy the ride.
I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy it. It's going to be positive heading into the postseason. But like we've talked about, they are entering Sixers territory. Like, people are going to start tuning out. All right, they can't get past the second round. All right, well, then, show me when you get there. You even said it. I'll believe when I see it. So it's February 27th. Now we're seeing good signs. I think it'll be another good regular season. If they stay healthy, I think they'll get to the postseason. Let me see it then, too.
Yeah. Real quick, we got this text message from Rich in Brigantine. I thought this was interesting. He said, the Flyers have more upside and are building the right way. The Sixers organization is a total dumpster fire. In the Flyers, I see hope. The Sixers, I just see despair with no hope. So it's easy to say that now, Rich. Here's the problem. The Flyers haven't been good in like 10 years. I mean, the Flyers have been hideous. They haven't won a playoff series. When was the last time I can't remember the last time they won a playoff series. So
they were in the postseason, I think, during the COVID bubble, I believe.
Right.
That was the last time they were in the postseason.
They were in but they haven't been in for like 3 years now.
It's been a while.
Even that year, they were like the 1 seed and got bounced by the Islanders. I remember that. But other than that, you can't sit here, Rich, and tell me that they've building the right way. They've been horrendous for like 10 years.
Well, at least it seems like they have an actual plan of what they want to do.
Well, what was their younger? They didn't have a plan for this whole now all of a sudden now, but what about the previous?
Well, because they didn't have Danny Briere and Keith Jones as their president and their GM. I mean, they had a change in leadership.
I get that, but my point is, for the last 15 years, that organization, don't tell me that they've been building the right way. Now they might be on the right path, but they have been a dumpster fire.
Well, I think that's what Rich is saying. I think that's what Rich is saying. I think he's saying, I think they're on the right path now. Sixers, he doesn't see anything there. All right, that's the Nuggets for you.
There's the Nuggets today. They're back tomorrow. See you, Nick.
All right, see you.
All right, Nick Earnshaw's Nuggets here on the Sports Bass Live, 97.3 ESPN. This hour brought to you by Broadlee's Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling. Call them at 609-390-3907, online, broadlees.net. 5 o'clock driving you home. Here we go. It is the final hour of the show, but a good one. We've got Ryer's Side. Ryan Rothstein will join me for the final hour as we do each and every day here on the Sports Bash. So, it's one of those times of the year. You got the football with the combine, the draft season. You got free agency in just a couple of days from now, about 10 days from now, till NFL free agency gets underway. Sixers virtually irrelevant right now. They lose last night. Flyers win. They're kind of hanging around. Phillies in spring training. So what are some of the things that are on our mind? Well, let's find out today with another edition of Ryer's Side here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN as we take a look at all the things that, there's so many great stories out there that we've been debating throughout the show. One of the things we threw out there had to do with that Sixer loss last night, which the season's over, right? The season is over, and it sucks because – I said one of the things with this team over the years, yes, you want to win a championship. Yes, it's frustrating that it never happened. But one of the things is you want to have hope. This team gave you hope. Whether they disappointed you or not, look, your sports teams disappoint you. That's what they do. There's only one team that wins. The Philadelphia teams have not had a lot of championships in our lifetime, although that's starting to pick up over the last 20 years or so. But you had hope. And one of the things with the hope is it gave you something. In other words, hey, I can't wait till April, May gets here because Friday night we're going to go out and watch the Sixers playoff game tonight. You're hoping they win on Wednesday so you can go out with your buddies and watch the game on Friday night. We're not going to get that this year. The hope is gone with this, and the wonder is there any hope moving forward from this? So it's been a big topic of conversation today. A lot of text messages. We got the poll question at Mike Gill Show. If you were a fan of the process and you could do the process again, would you?
Yeah, that's the topic of the day, man. I've caught a few segments, and I'm ready. I've been like, the guy in the tag team match hanging over the ropes for WWE. Like, tag me, get to my hand, tag me.
Hot tag. Here comes the hot tag.
Yeah. So you hot tagged me here for Ryer's Side. We're going to see where this combo goes. And I want to bring a different angle to this discussion and topic of the 76ers and the process. And your poll question, Mike Hill, was, would you do it again? And man, you and I debate and disagree on a lot of things, but we've always actually agreed on the process. We are on the same page. We have been on the same page about the process. I've been a big fan. I was a big fan of the process. Loved it. I look at it now with the benefit of hindsight, and especially everything that's transpired this year. And if you're asking me, would I do it again? No way. No way would I do it again because
wow. Shocking. That's a shocking answer from you. I'm legitimately shocked.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways to look at it, MG, because I can acknowledge that it was successful, the process, because they were able to acquire a lot of draft picks and they were able to make this team relevant again. But were they? They really were only, in the past 10, 11 years, they were relevant for 2, right? Followed by a lot of frustration and disappointment. And yes, Hinkie had a vision, which that vision was never allowed to be or able to be followed through on. But you build winning teams, you build championship teams through culture, not asset management and draft acquisition. And I think it's been as clear as day since Joel Embiid's arrival, their focus and priority on assets and draft picks and talent, and their failure to focus on the culture and the championship culture and how to work to become a champion has caused us to get to where we are today. And I wouldn't do this again. Your thoughts?
I totally disagree for a couple of reasons. One, look, just because they made mistakes, and they made a ton of them, I would go right back to the opportunity that they would not make the same mistakes twice. Like, we went through some of the picks and players that were available to them that they did not take, and the hope that if you do this a second time, that you don't make the same mistakes, that you draft the right guys, that you add the right guys. Because what I'm talking about is doing making sure that you have the most talented players available to you when it's your turn to pick. That's what the process was. They had the most talented players available to them. That doesn't mean they picked the right guy, but they were available. And if you're bad, you better be picking high enough so that you have the choice of the most talent. As teams ahead of you pick, you're losing talented players that you can choose from. Now, you have to make sure that you get those right. That's something that they got wrong. They took the wrong players. But going back to the first draft that they had, they took Michael Carter-Williams. What if they took Giannis Antetokounmpo? You would sign up for that again.
Listen, you can go through every draft, but that's the point I was going to make too in a minute, which is, okay, let's say they didn't have the process. We could look back on the past decade of drafts year by year. And what if they didn't have the process? What if they weren't tanking, right? There's still a very good chance, MG, that they would have landed on a very good player in one of those drafts if they were just, quote, a normal team that didn't go through the process, right? So,
well, we never know what's available. We never know what's available to them. But like they had multiple drafts where they were picking in the top 3. Let's say they don't take Ben Simmons, and instead, in the Ben Simmons draft, the third pick in that draft was Jaylen Brown. Let's say they just ended up with Jaylen Brown. How different things would have turned out for them. There's a lot of times like the Fultz draft. They make the Fultz draft. See, where everybody's mad is they made the trade.
Yeah.
The Celtics, if they don't make the trade, Boston's drafting Tatum number 1. So then I think at number 3, the question becomes, do the Lakers take Fultz at 2, and then you have somebody different? Who is that third player? Is it Lonzo Ball? But there were a lot of other guys right after them that could have been in play. De'Aaron Fox, I think, was in that draft. So that's my point of when I say, would you do it again?
Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo.
Right.
There was a lot of good players.
So my point is, would I do it again? Yes, because I want to be in position to be able to acquire that level of player. It's so much harder for me to acquire that level of player when I'm stuck in the middle.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, if you can tell me we can get in those positions, the obvious answer is yes, but I think where we're differing in our answers is you're sort of picking and choosing the process of the process.
Well, I'm not guaranteeing that you're going to get the picks right. All I'm saying is I would go down that road again for the opportunity to be in position to get the most talented players, as opposed to, look, the choice was at that time, we could trade off what we have and kind of start the franchise over. Or we could stay on the same path we're on where we're constantly winning 42 games, 38 games. I mean, I got the Sixers seasons here in front of me. So you go back to post 2001 when they went to the finals. They won 43 games, 48 games, 33 games, 43 games, 38 games, 35 games, 40, 41, 27, 41, 35. So you weren't doing anything. So for people to be mad that they gave up that path, I don't understand that line of thinking.
Well, because they gave up, Mike, they gave it up for what? They gave it up for the same thing. Like, I hear you.
Not necessarily, no, because the best you did in that run was you won 48 games and won a first-round series against the Hornets. Now, I get it. Everyone said, well, you never got out of the second round. But my point is this. You won 48 games in 2002. So that's it. The best year after that, from 2003 on, the most wins you had in a season were 43. All right? So you won 43 games. You got knocked out in the first round. Well, fast forward to 2017. 52, 51, 43, 49, 51, 54. That's 6 seasons in a row that you won more games than at any time in the previous decade. So you had a legitimately better shot with those teams than you did before. Before you were finishing 6th, 7th, 8th, getting knocked out in the first round. These teams were finishing 1st, 3rd, 2nd. You were constantly in position.
Yeah. I mean, only a
But
couple of years. And
we're only disappointed because we know the result of those. If I told you at the
Right.
beginning of every year you're going to win 50+ games and be the 1 or 2 seed, you're going to say, I got a shot to win a title, sign me up.
Yes, I would sign up for that. I would, but that's not the reality, right? Like, and obviously we're not living in a reality. This is a fun hypothetical, but how many of those years that you just highlighted from 2017 on did we legitimately feel like we're championship teams? Like 2, 3, if I'm being kind, right? And I think maybe I'm arguing a little bit on the success or failure aspect of it because I'm highlighting the failures. And we look at all of the issues that have been following this team year in and year out since the start of the process. It's because Hinkie left. Like we're saying, would we do it again? The league wouldn't allow us to do it again. And that is essentially the problem that the 76ers are in because they've had 4 different GMs making 4 different versions of horrible decisions.
They wouldn't allow them to do it on the same at the same level, but if you're one of the worst 3 teams in the league, you have a good chance that you're going to finish in the top 3, and that's really what they were hoping for, is to be in the top 3 in the draft, to give them the choice of the 57 best players, because 2 of them are going to be off the board, so you have a choice of everybody else that you want at your disposal. If I'm drafting 15th, there are 14 guys I have no shot of really getting. So being in that top 3 gives me the chance to get one of the 3 best players in the draft. And that's where they failed. They did not get one of the 3 best players every single time they were in the top 3. They got Joel Embiid, and he turned out to be the best player, but they were never able to pair him. Ben Simmons was awesome for 3 years, and then he fell off the wagon somewhere along the line. Markelle Fultz, a total disaster. But my point is, I would sign up to do it again for the opportunity of all the players that I could have got. I understand they made mistakes then, but I'll take my chance if they had the top 3 pick for the next 3 years, they would end up with 3 players that would end up putting them at the same level as, say, Oklahoma City is right now. How did Oklahoma City get here? They were really bad for 3 years in a row, and they have hit on everything.
Well, bingo. OKC is a fine-tuned machine when it comes to how it's run. Particularly, they have arguably the best GM on the planet, at least in the NBA, and they've been doing things. They've had a purpose, and they're a better organization.
One thing, though, that I got to give Morey some credit for, if you think he's been a disaster, and I know you like what he's done, but there are people out there, he has drafted well. So if you told me he had a top 5 pick, I feel pretty good that he would get you top 5 level talent here. He has got Maxey. He has got McCain. He's got guys in the second round that have kind of hung around. So if this team said, hey, we're a lottery team for the next 2 to 3 seasons, I think I feel pretty good that Morey would be the guy making those picks as opposed to Colangelo.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up Colangelo. I want to ask this. What to you was the worst decision and part of the process?
Colangelo. I said that earlier. Hiring Jerry Colangelo, that whole situation.
But that's sort of the league's fault, isn't it?
That's part of the rumors, of course, that Brian Colangelo or that Jerry Colangelo was brought in here, and then he essentially hired his son. Mm-hmm. And to me, his son wanted to separate himself so much from Hinkie. He hated that. He hated that the team was referred to as the process, and he wanted nothing to do with it. So he blew through Hinkie's assets just to remove them from everything that he did. He wanted no part of having anything that Hinkie did attached to his success.
Yeah, I would say Elton Brand was worse, but I'll throw this hypothetical and thought out there. Joel Embiid was arguably the beginning of the end in all of this. But like I tweeted out, or it's not tweet anymore, but I put out there on X, would Howie Roseman have ever drafted, I know it's different, it's not apples to apples, would he have ever drafted an injured big man who had to sit the first 2 years of existence, right? Like that set the tone for the next decade. It set the tone. Like that was the worst part of all of this, as crazy as it is.
Well, I mean, it's the catch-22. It's the yin and the yang of why you've been competitive and been the franchise that you are, that is perceived around the NBA. And listen, I know people here are so close to it, but in NBA circles, I mean, Tim Legler has been on our show. Brian Windhorst has been on the show. Tim Bontemps has been on the show. Any NBA person we have had on the show over the years will tell us the Sixers are a championship contender. Why? Because you have Joel Embiid. The problem with Embiid is he hasn't been available for you at when you needed him. Like, he hasn't been healthy enough in the playoffs. So, yeah, Embiid is the reason why you're a championship contender. He's also the reason why you're not.
Yeah, it feels like the 2012 team. It feels like a team that, well, they're sort of a title contender, but then on the other point, they're not at all. It's like we're back to the pre-process right now of, sort of competitive, but also no, not at all competitive, right?
Well, with Embiid off the floor, you're not competitive at all. I mean, it's
Right.
amazing the yin and the yang when he plays and you don't. Whenever he plays, your team is a top 2 seed. You're the most efficient team in the league. You're an MVP. And the minute he walks off the floor, your team turns into a disaster. That's how impactful he is. So when you have a player that impactful, you obviously hit a home run when you take a player of that magnitude. The problem is he hasn't been healthy enough to truly get the fruits of the labor of that draft choice.
And I don't believe he's that guy anymore. Like, everything that you're highlighting once was true. I don't believe that to be true anymore.
I can't disagree with you. I
Right.
mean, he's going to be 31 years old. We have no idea where this knee is going to take him moving forward. You can't trust him, so I don't know that you can build with him as the main guy. But can you build with him as a part of a team that has better, younger talent around him, and he is the second or third guy? I don't know. He's never been in that role before.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. There's so many layers to this. For me, I look at, if you could undo one bad decision, just sort of a different version of what we just discussed. But for me, it's Elton Brand's decisions of getting rid of Butler, trading away all of their remaining draft surplus for Tobias Harris and giving Tobias $185 million, paying him like a top 5 guy in the NBA. If we could undo that, we may not be in the situation that we're in today. Is that fair or unfair?
No, that's up. I mean, listen.
Yeah.
They did not choose Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. That is not what happened. Basically, that's the way that Butler said it. Tobias Harris over me, but that wasn't the case. They picked Ben Simmons over Butler. They decided that they were going to ride with Ben Simmons, a 23-year-old, 3-time All-Star. They're not idiots for that, but in hindsight, yes, they made a mistake. But at the time, Butler wanted to bring the ball up, and they said, no, that's Simmons. He's our guy to bring the ball up the court. And Butler said, I don't want to play with that guy then. So at that point, they have to make a decision, Ben or Jimmy. They chose Ben, and when they traded Jimmy, that's when they said, well, we can't lose Jimmy and Harris because we traded all the picks to get Harris here, and we traded all this stuff to get Butler here. We can't lose them both. That's when they signed Harris to the contract. If Butler was willing to play with Simmons, they probably would have given that contract to Butler.
If Butler was willing to play with Simmons, see, I don't think it was Butler being unwilling to play with him. I just think Butler was a guy that's not afraid to call things out. And
well,
Simmons didn't like it.
I think he said, I'm not playing with that guy. I don't want to play with Ben Simmons. If he's going to bring the ball up, I want the ball in my hands. I don't want it in his hands. And I think they were like, no, dude, we got a 23-year-old all-star here. Sorry, we're going to choose him.
Yeah. And that was
yeah, I mean, hindsight, it's a bad decision.
Yeah.
But at that time, come on. You can't pick Jimmy Butler at that time over a 6'10", 3-time all-star point guard. What are you going to do? Like, so they were put in a terrible spot. And then Butler ends up wanting to be traded because he doesn't want to be playing off the ball. And they sign Harris. You're right. The Harris decision, they didn't have to sign Harris, but I think they looked at it and said they traded. See, that pick that they traded to get Harris was a big move for them.
Yeah.
That was applauded on draft night when they traded Bridges for Zaire Smith. But no one cared about Zaire Smith. It was that they got that draft pick from Miami.
Yeah, but that wasn't a fully applauded move. It was nice that they got that extra pick, MG. But everyone was like, "What are you? Why are you getting rid of the Nova kid?" Even at the time, it was like, "Who's Zaire
Because it
Smith?"
was a Nova kid.
Yeah, we knew him
Right.
and we knew he was good.
Right. But the point was they weren't trying to get Zaire Smith, wasn't the trade. It was
No.
they wanted that draft pick because they felt that that would be a valuable piece to get a player to help them win a championship.
Well, another part,
Because the whole perception was, well, you can't just keep drafting guys. At some point, you're going to have to get a player in here who's a veteran player. So they go get this highly regarded draft choice as kind of like, hey, this is in our back pocket. We have this draft choice that now we can go get that player.
another part of that same draft was they trade away Holmes to the Suns for cash consideration. And that same year, they needed a backup big.
Well, they
Like,
needed to back up big their entire
year.
the entire Embiid. You could make an argument that what's one of the worst decisions? The fact that they've never had a backup big. If they just have a backup big, how many series would they have won?
Well, that's my point. If they had a backup big the year they lost to Toronto in 7 games, the Kawhi shot, they maybe are NBA champions that year because they couldn't, they were getting blown off the court when Embiid went to sit that series.
That was the worst year when they had Greg Monroe was the backup center.
Yeah.
And anytime Embiid left the floor, they would be like a -20 in 4 minutes. It was unbelievable. But that was the story of many of their second-round losses was anytime Embiid. But again, it goes back to the impact of Embiid, how good he was. In those runs, whenever he left the court, they would be in the lead, and then they'd be down. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So that's one of the things you look back on and say they just never prioritized or just couldn't find anybody to back him up.
Yeah, it's so unbelievable. And you just look at what the legacy of Joel Embiid is right now and what it potentially will be. It's a damn shame, MG. Like it really is. It's sad, but it's going to be one heck of a documentary.
It will be, and I guess the big thing is I think people feel like the discussion we're having is like it's the end of the era, but I don't think that they can get rid of him. So I don't see that happening. I don't think that you're going to, like, if Joel Embiid can play again, and I don't know that he can, I think it will be wearing a Sixers uniform. Heck, they're not even ready to write him off for this year yet.
No, like they're still coming out and saying, we're making this play-in push. And even Stephen A. Smith is talking about getting Paul George back to LA. It's like, okay, dude, he's under contract for 4 years too. Like, how are you going to get Paul George back to LA in the offseason? I don't think that's happening either.
There's a possibility of that, and I'll tell you why. LA was willing to sign him for 3 years. The Sixers went to the 4th year. Now that he's burned a year, they might be more willing to say, okay, we'll do the 3 years now because you paid him for the first year that we didn't want to pay him.
Yeah, but they're going to have to trade to get him now. That's the difference.
Well, and what does Philadelphia care what they get in return? The problem with is you got to match salary, so you're taking on a bunch of waste from them. You end up with Ben Simmons back, although I think he's a free agent at the end of this year. Right?
Dude, watching Ben Simmons and James Harden play is sickening. It's sickening.
Surreal, isn't it?
It really is surreal. Ben's a nice little role player now. He's a shell of himself, but he's.
Yeah, I mean, listen, now that he doesn't have the expectations as the number 1 pick, he does his thing. He rebounds. He starts the break. He finds guys open. He sets them up for 3. And the funny part is he's got Harden, and he sets up Batum, and 3's in the corner. Comes Nick Batum raining them away. You got the triple threat there. They were all traded for each other. Now they're all back together.
Yeah, West Coast Sixers, like the West Coast Flyers for the Kings once upon a time.
That's right. All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, live video on the X platform and on YouTube at Mike Gill Show. Subscribe, follow along, be a part of the show. Flyers back tonight taking on the Pittsburgh Penguins. You can hear that game on 97.3 ESPN. We got another segment to go. It is the Sports Bash, and don't forget, my friends over at the Nizam Indian Restaurant, Route 40 in Egg Harbor Township, they, right now, about 5:30 on Thursday night, looking for something for dinner, they welcome bookings for hosting events and complete food catering services. The whole family, great spot for everybody. Bring them on out. You can reserve a table or even book the entire restaurant to host a private party or your corporate event. Open 7 days a week from 11:30 to 9:30. Visit thenizams.com for more information. 5:31. I'm Mike Gill. What's up? Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. All right, Ryan Rothstein's with me for the final hour, of course, on a Thursday. We got more Ryer Side. What else is happening out there? Good conversation. 609-403-0973 on the text board. If you want to chime in, you can get involved on the conversation. We were talking about if you were a fan of the process, would you do it again? In other words, would you take a couple bad seasons and build up some more draft capital, hope to stock the talent back up, and hope that, 3-4 years from now that you're a much more competitive team than you think you might be 3 or 4 years from now on what you currently have and what the future could hold here. So that's kind of one of the conversations we've thrown out there throughout the day. What else you got?
Yeah, and that point that you bring up, Mike Gill, is so dependent on who's in the front office. Like, who is the general manager? Because, as I outlined and highlighted briefly in the last segment, the fact that there's just been a game of musical chairs with who the general manager of the 76ers franchise has been, whether it's, Hanky, Colangelo's, Elton Brand, Brett Brown, Daryl Morey, right? Like, that has played such a role in the 76ers struggles. Now, I believe Daryl Morey has done a good job since he's joined the 76ers. But we have some audio here. Stephen A. Smith has discussed a lot as it relates to the 76ers, and he doesn't necessarily agree with my praise of one Daryl Morey. He said, if I'm Sixers ownership, I wouldn't be so impressed. Let's hear what Stephen A. Smith had to say about it.
Most of Daryl Morey's decisions are based primarily on analytics. That's why you signed the contracts that you signed. There's consequences for that. Now, again, I'm not advocating for the man to be dismissed. I'm simply saying if I'm the owner, Josh Harris, and I'm looking at the atrocity that the Philadelphia 76ers has become, heads must roll because decisions that have been made have not been impressive. I'm sorry. You got to do something about it.
All right, let's say I am to agree with Stephen A. Smith, which I don't necessarily agree with him on this particular one. But let's just say I'll play along. I agree. You're saying you disagree. What moves do you think that you like, and which moves do you not like? Why would you trust as opposed to say they got to get rid of them?
I don't look at this Sixers situation as a decision-based situation. Like, this team's in the mud because of Joel Embiid and his lack of availability.
Well, would you say then he was responsible for making the decision to sign him to an extension?
Was who responsible for who?
Morey. Is he responsible then for being the decision maker that says, let's give him a 4-year extension?
No, I'm sure. But he probably wasn't the sole person. Obviously, that's a Josh Harrison ownership type of thing that you're involved with as well. So obviously the owner would sign off on something like that, I would imagine. But, Daryl Morey's done a lot of good for this team. Daryl Morey arrived, and this was a very bleak roster and situation. And he got this team out of the mud by flipping Ben Simmons, by flipping Richardson, by doing a lot of things that put this team in position on paper. But, like, I do agree that heads are going to have to roll, Mike Gill, but let's not roll heads just because we feel like we have to roll heads. You know what I mean?
I look, it's a tough one. Like, I'm looking through his record. His first move that he ever had as a member of the Philadelphia 76ers organization was he selected Tyrese Maxey. All right, so that moved alone. Not to mention, in that draft, he also got Isaiah Joe and Paul Reed, two guys who have turned into Joe has turned into a really good player.
That's 3 for
Reed,
3.
Yeah, I mean, so I think his draft record has shown you that he can find talent in the draft. Some of the other things that he did, the Al Horford trade. He traded Horford and a 2025 first-round pick, which happens to be this one. You traded that in 2020, and now 5 years later, that pick is starting to rear its ugly head. But this is the pick that we're talking about. It was Al Horford and a first-round pick. And in return, you got a bunch of just, Danny Green was in that, and it was a way to get Horford's contract off your books.
Yeah.
And you got Danny Green, who was a player that helped this team.
He was a champion, yeah.
For a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
you also gave Oklahoma City a first-round pick to take Horford's contract, and now, oddly enough, that's the pick that is a thorn in your side right now. And now remember, that was that trade happened on December of 2020. You gave him a 2025 first-round pick, and you're thinking back then, oh, you gave a 2025 pick. Who cares? Because you figured you would be good, and the pick wouldn't matter. Top six protected. Who cares? You could have my pick at 31 or 29 or whatever, and now here we are. But he got Horford's contract off the books. So that was applauded, that move.
Definitely. At the time that we gave Al Horford a boatload of money, and he was playing like dog poo. There was many that believed he wasn't going to be able to unload him, and he did.
Would you just, in now hindsight, would you just have kept Horford and keep because he's gone to Boston and played pretty well.
Yeah, no. I mean, clearly Philly is a place where people lose their powers, like Space Jam. So I think Al Horford would have just continued to deteriorate here. You had to get rid of him.
He traded Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and Ben Simmons, a 2023 first-round pick, and a 2027 first-round pick to Brooklyn for James Harden and Paul Millsap. Philadelphia also got a trade exception in 2023. But keep in mind, they have a 2027 first-round pick that it goes to Brooklyn now as well. That was to get rid of Ben Simmons.
Yeah. Listen, I don't know anyone at the time that would say no to that. Another situation where everyone saying, fans and media members, pundits, how are they going to unload Ben Simmons? How are they going to unload Ben Simmons? There's fans begging, just unload him for a bag of peanuts. And Daryl Morey was able to get in return a Hall of Fame player in James Harden. That was a massive win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think a lot of people look back and said that people wanted to get rid of Simmons to begin with. He played it well. He held on to him. People said, just get rid of him. Just get rid of him. You're not getting anything. And he ended up not only getting something, he got James Harden. The problem became Harden also no longer wanted to be here. And
partly
he ended
Morey's
up getting
fault.
Traded as well.
And that was partly Morey's fault. How it all, ended.
Right, exactly. So he ends up getting something of value for Simmons, but in the end, he has to then move that value as a reason because Harden didn't want to be here anymore. And in that trade, in return, you got Nick Batum, Robert Covington, KJ Martin, Marcus Morris, a second-round pick, a 2028 first-round pick, a 2029 first-round pick, another second-round pick in 2029, and a whole bunch of others. I mean, so you got 2 first-round picks in that trade for Harden, which are coming down the road.
Yeah, I think, we can go move by move, transaction by transaction. There hasn't been one move, especially at the time of said move, where we're like, what is Daryl Morey doing? Every decision was like, wow, we somehow got out of this situation. We got out of the fire alive, unscathed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And that's what's the perplexing part about all of this is most of the moves that they have made over the years, you were at the time, you were saying, man, that's a wise move. That's a smart move. It's a good move. They made a good decision. And yet in the end, hindsight is that didn't work. I don't understand it. So I don't know what to do with Morey. I have been a Morey fan. I think Morey knows what he's doing. I think he's smart. I think to me, he's a lot like Roseman. He's a smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
He plays it, and it's like I'd rather have him on my team than not on my team.
Yeah.
But it's for whatever reason these moves are not working out. But I'll tell you, one thing he has done well is draft it well. The trades and stuff have been more of like untangling mistakes from previous regimes that he had to kind of get out of. But now you're at the point where you've untangled a lot of those webs, and now this is your team, and now this team's not very good.
And, we didn't bring up McCain either, another home run draft pick. And He's a guy that's aggressive midseason at the deadline. He's a guy that's aggressive in the offseason with free agency, i.e. Paul George. Like, he ticks off every box.
By the way, he drafted McCain. He also took Bona, who I think can play a little bit, and they signed Justin Edwards. That kid can play.
Yeah, absolutely. Grimes is playing well right now. That's another good little acquisition that was made. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could point to and say, wow, that was, that's a nice job. I'll add this. Okay, if you want to get rid of Morey, fine, but I would ask, well, why, and what's the direction?
Well,
Like,
the only scenario I see that they get rid of Morey, okay, is if Harris somehow convinces Bob Myers, who's running the Commanders, he's like an advisor to the Commanders. He was the GM of the Warriors teams. If he said, I can fix this mess, I'll do it.
Right.
That would be the only way I think Harris gives up on Morey. I could be wrong, but I think he is kind of tied to Morey, is trusting in Morey as the basketball guy to make those decisions. But if Bob Myers said, Josh, I'll help you out, I think that would be the way he would make the move.
Yeah, I think Bob Myers isn't that stupid. I think Myers has
but everybody likes challenges, man. If you have any like competitive fire, you like a challenge to say, I can fix this thing. Let me, I'll figure it out. Like, you want that challenge. It's so if he wants that challenge, he got away from the Warriors. Why? I don't know. Was he burned out? Was he just tired of winning championships? I have no idea. He wanted a new challenge. He went to football.
I think he didn't want to be the guy that got rid of Klay Thompson.
It's possible. It's possible. He might also not want to be the guy that has to get rid of Joel Embiid.
Yeah, exactly. Bingo. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
or have to figure out a way to do it, or have to figure out a way to get rid of Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I want Morey to stay mainly because I need some continuity.
Yeah.
Like,
so would you be for or against moving on from Nurse?
I'd be against it. 100% against it. You can't assess this season and Nick Nurse at all. Nick Nurse is a top 3 coach on the planet. I don't know who you're bringing in instead of him. Who are you bringing in?
I don't know, but I'm not a blame the coach guy, and I'm not blaming Nurse, but his body language at times is awful. He looks like he would rather be any place other. Yeah, I mean, listen, Brett Brown was here through some bad times, and he never gave you,
Brett Brown was happy to be here, man, and Brett Brown understood his role in that losing process, right? Like,
right,
Nick
but
Nurse,
even when they started to win and Brett was getting criticized heavily, he still was pretty upbeat and positive. Nick looks like he wants to be any place else but here.
do you
I
fire
just haven't
him
been
over that. I mean, this is an unprecedented situation.
I don't know. Is the team not responding to him at all? Like, is this why it's so bad? I mean, do we think, I had Keith Smith on back in the 2:00 hour. I said, like, okay, Embiid's hurt. Should it be this bad? He's like, no. I mean, you got Maxey, you got Paul George. You got some talent like that was here. Now, they ended up trading a bunch of guys off. Some other guys have gotten hurt, but it really shouldn't be this bad. Are they just not responding to Nick Nurse? Does Paul George, like, say, I don't want, I don't know. Because the team is losing so much, it's hard to quantify. But I know people who are, at those games covering them, and they're like, dude, they don't run anything. They just don't run anything.
Well, it's not that just Joel Embiid hasn't been there. There's been a lot more to this puzzle, man. Like, PG has been in and out of the lineup, mostly out. McCain, out. There's been a lot of other, like Kyle Lowry, out. I can go on and on with the role players that were in and out of this lineup. Andre Drummond, out. Like, every night there's been multiple different guys since day one that are in and out of this lineup. And that plays a huge factor.
Well, it's almost like guys were in and out of the lineup. I'll give you that. I'm not debating that. And Nurse was like, well, then I'm not even trying. The guys I want aren't here, so therefore, the heck with it.
I mean, maybe, dude. Maybe. I could be blind to it.
Because it was like in Toronto, one of the things that he was so, like, highly regarded was they won the championship when they had Kawhi and that crew, a younger Lowry. They had a really solid team. And that, but when he lost those guys and he had lesser teams, They came out with like all these like crazy defense, even with the Lowry team in the championship against the Warriors. He was throwing all sorts of box and ones and triangles
no
and
one's
twos.
practicing in Philly though. No one's practicing.
Right, but like so when all the players left Toronto and he had like whatever was left over, what impressed people was people thought Toronto was just going to fall off the map, and he kept getting them back to the playoffs because he was like coming up with all these creative defenses and having this team play hard.
Yeah.
And you haven't seen any of that. Like even last year, you didn't see a lot of that.
No, I think if anything, Nick Nurse would probably resign before he gets fired. I'll throw this question really quick at you. If you had to guess how many starting lineups have been used?
Oh, 40.
All right, close guess. 36 in 58
Oh, geez,
games.
I was just joking.
36.
Yeah, well, part of that's him changing the lineup. I mean, at some point, you just find a consistent lineup of the guys who are there and just keep playing them.
Yeah, but I also think it's to the point of there's just been so many guys night to night, you don't know if they're going to suit up or not. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right, Sports Pass Live, 97.3 ESPN, and another edition of Ryer's Side. Good fun today. We'll do it again tomorrow.
All right, man.
All right, Sports Pass Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. Live video to finish out the show. We got today's Bet365 play of the day coming up next. All right, time for the Bet365 play of the day. What do we got from last night? Gave you 2 games. Threw that Sixer game in there, but hope you didn't play it. They played too hard for my liking.
That game didn't count. It was not an official game.
Not an official game. Nope.
But the 2 games you were officially locked in on were both covered. You had the Pacers covering against the Raptors, and you had the Rockets covering against the Spurs. You are now 117, 80, and 1.
117, 80, and 1. A 2-0 night again last night for all the people out there. The picks of the people is what we should call these picks.
Sure.
All right. Didn't seem like you were on board with that.
I was so locked in waiting for the next pick that you started making my brain have to change direction.
Orlando tonight taking on the Warriors. They're getting 5. I like the Magic tonight in that game against Golden State. Also, I like the Minnesota Timberwolves tonight against the Lakers. They're my Bet365 plays of the day. Timberwolves, I think, are 6 against L.A., and the other game is 5, I believe. Gotta have to double check on that. I wrote them down earlier, but I can't read my handwriting sometimes when we get to this time of the day.
This time of the day?
Yeah, I jot stuff down in chicken
It's
scratch.
a specific time of day that you lose track of what it looks like.
Something like that. If you're a Sixers fan who was a fan of the process, would you do it again? At Mike Gill Show, 56% no, 43% yes. Closer than I thought. A lot of the texters today, they said yes. Great show today. Appreciate everybody who texted in and was a part of it. Sports Bass Live, 97.3 ESPN. Who plays tonight? Flyers, Penguins, 7:30, right? You got Durso coming up tonight?
Yeah, Kevin Durso coming up at 6:20.
Yeah, so the Lawton stuff, see what happens with that. I know his name's been in the trade. Durso and some other reports saying that the Flyers looking for a first-round pick. So far, the best offer, according to Frank Cervalli, is a second-round pick from the Winnipeg Jets. So we'll keep our eye on that. Durso tonight has more on the Flyers and the Penguins. It's a big game for them in terms of playoffs. They're actually still in position to be in the playoff chase. So give that a listen tonight with Durso right here on the Sports Bash. I'm out. Talk to you tomorrow on a happy hour Friday, everybody. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your Thursday night. See ya.